Save the declining celestial genealogy. No, I meant the last sentence. Become an idol. Yes, that's it. Huaishi's eyes widened. Become an idol? Has celestial genealogy fallen to the extent that I have to sell my body to save it? Ahem. Although life is not easy, it's not to this extent. The goose-like creature subconsciously avoided Huaishi's gaze. It's just that the reward for the overall popularity election champion is the 10010 New Generation Idol project jointly launched by the Giant Goose Corporation and Yaoqi Entertainment. Mr. Huai, you are so popular now, and you are the Prince of Paradise. Isn't it natural for you to debut and become an idol? No, I'm very busy. Thank you. Huaishi seemed to see his low-key life of sponsored partnerships waving away. In fact, you only need to authorize it. We have recently launched an AI virtual idol project. Look, the relevant plans have been completed. Your two-dimensional image, Son of Huaishi, has not been launched yet, but it is already in the top 3, even surpassing Son of the White Emperor. Rip, the plan was torn to shreds by Huaishi with an expressionless face. He raised his hand and pointed to the door. Leave. Wait, think about it. Okay, I won't mention it again. Okay? Under Huaishi's disheartened gaze, the goose-like creature couldn't help but shudder. It hurriedly brought out a life-saving straw. Besides, you haven't received your reward yet. As it spoke, it unscientifically pulled out a huge iron box from its chest pocket and placed it in front of Lin Huang. Young Master Ming or Xiangjuan? Huaishi hesitated. Young Master Ming? Pa. Another envelope was pulled out from the box and placed on Huaishi's bed. Please take a look. This is one of the third-place rewards jointly sponsored by Tomorrow's News and the Giant Goose Group. It is a list of materials for your advancement and a black gold membership card for the Stoneware Society. Huaishi looked at it suspiciously for a long time before taking out a black membership card from the envelope. It was rumored that all basic materials could be purchased at a 20% discount, and during the special period, the black gold VIP membership card could even be sold at a 50% discount. This was the highest level membership card that ordinary people could obtain through spending, but it still required a single order of more than 500 million yuan to obtain it. Just this alone made Huaishi feel a lot better. After all, it was all money. When he saw the list of materials for the advancement, he felt like a huge stone had been lifted from his heart. On Crow's list, all the materials that could be bought with money were all prepared. As long as Huaishi made a phone call, it would be delivered to him through yesterday's express delivery service within an hour. Huaishi did not need to receive it immediately. After all, many of the materials required special processes to maintain and store them. In an instant, he had felt the deep pain of a broken soul, as well as the hesitation and despair of being born as a human. It was precisely because of this resonance and connection that his source substance could be truly accepted by Luo Xian, right? Just like the true meaning of nothingness was to allow people to perceive the essence of things through appearance, the meaning behind the soul connection was to give the sublimated the ability to treat others as themselves. There was no distinction between each other's sympathy and compassion. It allowed people to more vividly and in detail experience the changes in the other's soul, and also allowed others to more clearly understand their own meaning. Although the appearance was just more sympathy, in fact, it had unconventionally increased the persuasiveness of Huaishi's actions and words. Coincidentally, it had led to the cowherd up, which really made Huaishi have mixed feelings. In addition, this is a special customization service provided by the Cavendish Workshop for you. When you were unconscious, a master had already come to calculate the detailed physical signs and data. Just a few hours ago, the customization service was completed. It's right here. While speaking, the goose-like creature took out a backpack-sized alloy box from the box. On it was a logo that Huaishur had seen before. It represented the world's largest high-precision alchemy workshop, Cavendish. As a super-large alchemy workshop with the largest number of scholars and alchemists in the world, this giant enterprise located next to the headquarters of the Astronomical Society almost monopolized the manufacturing of mass-produced alchemy equipment. Whether it was basic equipment or the development of large-scale war weapons, their active shadows could all be seen. But in fact, the Astronomical Society's technical department was the main shareholder. It could almost be seen as a reflection of the technical department's ability, whether it was alchemy, physics, dynamics, source substance, or even reverse cracking of relics at the border. They had the world's leading technical strength. Huaishur had already experienced the magical effects of the enchanted gloves. If it weren't for the fact that alchemy equipment was prohibited in this rookie competition, he would definitely carry it with him. Now that he heard that there was a high-quality equipment gift, naturally a strong sense of expectation rose in his heart. He secretly prayed, "Don't King give me a sword or saber weapon. I really don't lack these." The box was opened. The goose-shaped creature did not expect Huaishur to be so ignorant. It could only ponder for a moment before explaining again. "This is the All Ages card, operated by the Tomorrow News gaming company Super World. Haven't you played it before?" Huaishur shook his head blankly. So the goose-shaped creature's expression became more and more startled. After a long time, it sighed in amazement. "You are really focused. I thought you came specifically for this. After all, you said that. What exactly did I say?" Huaishur became more and more puzzled. He felt that he was going to be persecuted again. Since the 40s of the last century, Superworld released the All Ages card, created with the Sublimator as the main character. This card game had almost swept the entire realm, border, and hell. Even many abyssal creatures liked to play a few games when they had nothing to do. In addition to the rules that were easy to learn but difficult to master and various constant updates, the All Ages card was most famous for the variety of cards that were constantly released following current events. Some characters would enter the basic pack and circulate in various borders and hell, while some characters would be limited release as commemorative cards after certain events. Thanks to excellent copyright control and technical protection, there were almost no counterfeits of this kind of card integrated with the source substance. Many cards were widely sought after by enthusiasts because of their rarity. 4 years ago, a dazzling limited edition announcer, Jaeger, that was accidentally wrong was sold at the Magic Gold Bank's auction for $1.6 billion, creating a miracle in the history of the All Ages card. And because of a freak combination of factors, due to the extremely conservative and harsh card-making conditions of the editorial department of Super World, it was unknown when it started whether one could enter the All Ages card, what kind of frame, and what kind of card face could be obtained, had become the benchmark for many people to measure the achievements of a sublimator. And the same sublimator might have more than one card face because of their achievements in different fields. For example, the Natural Enemy, tier, in addition to the diamond card, Natural Enemy, tier that represented the rank of the natural enemy. There was also the Creator, tier that represented his identity as the creator, the limited edition dazzling card, Savior, tier that represented that he had once destroyed a surviving evil with his own strength, and the dark gold card, Defender, tier that represented that he had participated in the Abyss War between the Roman pedigree and the Russian Federation pedigree as a mercenary, what kind of card back the sublimator got, what kind of frame they had, and what kind of title they were given were all evaluated and issued by the editorial department of Super World, which was backed by the Tomorrow News. Then, the full amount was transferred to the sublimator themselves as the card face. Until now, what kind of card face they had, what kind of frame they were given, and what kind of evaluation they had become a kind of evaluation of the sublimator themselves, other than the diamond card back of the natural enemy, and the source tin card back of the crown won. The usual specifications of the card face were only gold, silver, copper, and iron, which were used to distinguish the rank of the character on the card and the impact it caused. If one wanted to use their own rank to get a card face, then there was an unwritten rule. One must be at least rank 4. In other words, no matter what, sublimators below rank 4 didn't have the qualifications to use their own strength to get such an honor. And only sublimators with a correction value or a distortion of more than 0.5% had the qualifications to have a gold card back. To be more specific, there was the difference between gold, dark gold, and iridescent gold, which was the difference in achievement. In addition, there were commemorative cards that were sold every year according to current events and news. For example, Huaishir's commemorative card represented his 3rd place in the Asian Rising Talent competition and his flawless performance. There were only 1,000 of these commemorative cards in the world. Prince of Paradise, Huaishir. It was said that the moment it was released, it was sold out by the fanatical female audience. And 4 hours later, the price of the antique on the collection of 10,000 sins had soared to 10 times the original price. In comparison, the sales of Great Arctic Fox and Demon Dragon Princess were simply a failure. This was the difference in popularity. A certain unknown collector, Lady Hell, said so, and some male players who had eaten lemons said that the card shouldn't be called Prince of Paradise, but Cowherd of Paradise. And as a reward specially given to Huaishir, there was only one card in the world. This card was upgraded to silver rank, and if Huaishir was willing to sell it, it would definitely sell for a high price. After hearing all the popular science and explanation from the goose-shaped creature, Huaishir no longer had any expectations for the fantasy of this world. The goose-shaped creature happily held up the box in its hand and said in a cheerful tone, as if all of humanity had been saved, "Congratulations, Mr. Huaishir. You have entered the card pool of the all ages and fulfilled your dream." Huh. Huaishir stared blankly at the card in front of him. Is this even possible? Chapter 298. Because of Huaishir's insistence, after the medical experts confirmed that there was nothing wrong with Huaishir, Zhu Hongqin was finally discharged from the hospital that day. Then he saw his eldest cousin sitting in the hallway. "Hey, young man." Zhu Hongqin waved at him. "Congratulations on being promoted to 3rd place." "Even so, it doesn't feel real at all," Huaishir laughed bitterly. "Is something wrong, eldest cousin?" Zhu Hongqin thought for a moment. "Not really. I've been giving all my work to 3rd sister lately, and I've been slacking off every day. I'm really happy, but, young man, it seems like something might happen to you." Huaishir didn't understand. However, Zhu Hongqin didn't say anything. He stood up and patted Zhu Hongqin on the shoulder. "There are some things that I shouldn't say. I'm not in a position to interrupt, and I can't help you, so you should be careful. Do you have any plans to travel? London, Rome, or Petrograd aren't bad either." Huaishir was stunned. "Wait a minute. Is someone trying to harm me again?" "Forget about it. Let's not talk about such disappointing things." Zhu Hongqin waved his hand carelessly and changed the subject. "Are you ready to leave?" Huaishir nodded, but then he saw Zhu Hongqin hand over the pouch next to him. Huaishir could sense the familiar origin substance fluctuations coming from the black pouch. He almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. Zhu Hongqin chuckled. "You have to take good care of important things. Don't leave them lying around." Huaishir hurriedly opened the pouch and saw that the virtuous sword had been repaired. It didn't seem to have changed at all. After he had left the competition, this relic had been left behind in Yamatai City. After the competition ended, Yamatai City had become 3rd Bianliang City, the border of the Eastern Summer Country. Zhu Hongqin was having a headache trying to figure out how to negotiate with the Bureau of Social Security to get this thing back. Even if he had to pay any price as the successor, he couldn't let the last relic of the previous prince fall into his hands. However, he hadn't expected Zhu Hongqin to return it to him without taking a single coin. "Thank you." Huai Shi was pleasantly surprised as he carried the sword pouch on his back, sincerely grateful. "There's no need to thank me. Little Xian was the one who brought her out." Zhu Hongqin shrugged. "That child is still in the hospital. Aren't you going to go take a look?" The joy on Huai Shi's face froze. Did something happen to her? Some problems have to be faced sooner or later. It's just that she regrets it. Zhu Hongqin sighed and pulled out a key card from his pocket. "Basement 2. Just say that I told you to come here. They'll let you in." Huai Shi took the key card and had an ominous feeling. The second basement of the hospital was deeper than he had expected. If it weren't for the protection of the surrounding instruments, her soul might have already decayed and broken, and she might have become a vegetable. So pitiful, isn't it? The muscular old man beside the bed calmly glanced at him, waved his hand, and motioned for the people behind him to leave. He slowly said, "It's been like this since the end of the competition. She's obviously fine, but her soul has begun to decay, rapidly. Even the sacred mark can't be maintained." After a long silence, Huai Shi sat in a chair. He wanted to say that it was too exaggerated to say that she had become 3 times weaker, but in the end, he could only ask in a low voice, "Is this my fault?" "Don't think so highly of yourself, kid. At best, you just happen to play a more important role. If it weren't for you, I would have killed her." The old man leaned back in the chair, quietly gazed at his daughter, and calmly said those terrible words. "She was born with the advantages of her mother and me, with incredible talent and the compatibility with the abyss. But unfortunately, she also inherited our flaws, while retaining the characteristics of a human and an abyss creature. Before this, when the abyss side gained the upper hand, she gradually became like a monster, until she met you and had that duel with you. Then you saved her. For a monster, all of this is insignificant, just a victory or defeat. But for the human part, your kindness is too heavy, Huai Shi. It's so heavy that she can't accept it." Elder Luo's expression turned into one of mockery and pity when he saw his daughter in such a sorry state. When the human part of her rejects or even denies the monster side, her life that was built on this inheritance will collapse. She wants to become a human, but the human side is too thin to support the existence of her soul. Will she die? I don't know. Elder Luo slowly shook his head. Now her soul is being rebuilt after the collapse of her cognition. It's like a whole house being rebuilt from the ruins. Who knows if she can persist until the day it's completed? Is there no other way? Huai Shi asked. If it's the Dongxia genealogy, this is her own choice. What does it have to do with others? Elder Luo seemed to be amused by his serious look. Are you mistaken, Huai Shi? Not everyone will fall into the abyss of misfortune after leaving your help. Why do you have to make everyone unable to leave you? Wasn't this her choice of her own free will? If she wants to live, she can live. He took a deep look at Huai Shi. Learn to have expectations for others, kid. The world will always operate as usual, whether you're there or not. After a long silence, Huai Shi nodded bitterly and got up to say goodbye. Don't come here in the future. Elder Luo walked him to the door of the hospital and said coldly, since you've already graduated, don't keep pestering your teacher's daughter. You're asking for a beating. This was a rare consolation from the old man, but Huai Shi still found it difficult to smile. He waved his hand and turned to say goodbye. He heard the last words behind him. She said, "Thank you." He stopped and looked back, but the old man was no longer at the door of the hospital. Should he feel relieved or blame himself more? Huaisher didn't know. He carried his bag and wandered on the streets of Jinling. He wanted to find someone to talk to for the first time. Then he saw a man leaning on a car at the end of the long street. I guess you want to find someone to talk to now. The man threw the cigarette, and stepped on it. He shook his head at him. Let's go, I'll take you to drink. Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Do you all like to suddenly jump out and wait for me? It's just a coincidence. Yu Dongri shrugged. There's no time to explain. Get in the car. Also, you know that minors can't drink, right? In the car, Yu Dongri rolled his eyes and urged him to get in the car. What haven't you done that minors can't do? Huaisher thought about it seriously and felt that what he said made sense. He threw his bag into the car and sat in the passenger seat. When did you come? Morning. When are you leaving? Tomorrow. Yu Dongri pondered for a moment and suddenly asked, if your vacation isn't over yet, are you interested in going to Shambhala with me? At the same time, Ai Ching heard the sound of knocking outside the office door. She looked up and was about to speak when she heard the door open. The guest outside the door walked into the room. He held a cane and walked forward slowly and cautiously. Cautiously. Rather than being afraid of slipping, it was more like he was afraid of any accidents. In the end, he sat on the sofa in the office and sighed. I'm so tired. The old man sighed softly and said, I haven't walked so long in a long time. Why are the buildings here so tall? Xiao Qing. Ai Qing took off her glasses and looked at the old man. She said expressionlessly, the Astronomy Club is a confidential organization. I thought that outsiders were not allowed to enter during office hours. The rules are the rules, but they can't stop an old man from seeing his great-granddaughter, right? The old man smiled indifferently. He raised his turbid eyes and looked at the young face that he hadn't seen for a long time. He smiled kindly and said, since you didn't come to see me, I could only come to see you. Yin Liangji, the leader of the revival of the Yin family in Jinling and the actual controller of the clan, the old man who had pulled the clan back from the brink of destruction, said, long time no see, Xiao Qing. Yeah, long time no see, Ai Qing replied indifferently. Great-grandfather. Chapter 299. Long time no see, great-grandfather. After Ai Qing went to London to study, she had not seen her great-grandfather for 7 years. However, after 7 years, her words were not as warm and affectionate as others expected. Instead, they were as cold and indifferent as hatred. Yin Liangji calmly listened to her words and looked around indifferently. Finally, his gaze fell on her table. It was a card embedded in a crystal frame. Even with his back to the frame, he could still imagine what kind of scene it was. This should be the masterpiece you are most proud of, right? He nodded and expressed his approval. Your eyes are much better than mine. After leaving home for so many years, little Qing, you have indeed achieved something. Ai Qing lowered her head and looked at the face brimming with light. She couldn't help but laugh. What's going on? Great-grandfather, are you regretting it? Yes. The old man nodded seriously. If I had expected him to have such achievements, I would have been the one to raise this child. Unfortunately, after I met his parents, I was completely disappointed in his family. This was my biggest oversight. I should have thought twice before I acted. If I had to say, I shouldn't have cared so much about face in the past and directly cut the weeds and get rid of the roots. Unfortunately, I am not as smart as you and only now understand this principle. He sighed softly. Unfortunately, there is no more chance now. Ai Qing coldly twirled her pen, admiring the old man's undisguised frustration and annoyance. It was as if she was looking at the tears of a crocodile. from the time he became third place in the rookie competition. No, before he stepped into the rookie competition, when he became an ascender, you should have expected this day. By the time Chi Wen's death alerted you, it was already too late. He is already an official member of the Astronomy Association, a newcomer favored by the four major armies, and a latecomer that both the Governing Bureau and the Continuation Academy have already made arrangements for. Even after he leaves the Astronomy Association, the Eastern Summer Genealogy will unhesitatingly support him. After he advances from the ivory tower, one day he will climb up the ladder of the Astronomy Association and become an indispensable pillar of the celestial genealogy. He will become the shadow that forever hangs over the Yin family. You know what, Xiaoqing? I really miss the way you and him worked so well together. Yin Liangji seemed to be absent-minded. Like countless old people, he reminisced about the past. When Huai Guang was still alive, we used to work together like all of you. Huai Guang and Yin were never separated. He was the one who carried out the plan, and I was the one who made the plans. Both of us worked together, and we never failed. Unfortunately, Huai Guang died early. He died too early. If he hadn't died, all of this wouldn't have happened, right? There's no need to wait for your generation. The Yin family's resurgence will be complete in my hands, and that idiot Huai Guang will definitely be able to realize his dream and become one of the most famous explorers of hell. His name will be imprinted on the myriad world's tablet. The so-called life is such a fragile thing. Everything in this world is more fragile than life. Yin Liangji raised his fingers that were covered in age spots and tapped his walking stick. Good things in the world are not firm, and colorful clouds scatter easily. This world changes too easily. It's too easy. In just a few years, everything in the past can be wiped away. In the end, he'll become an interlude, and I'll be successful. AI Qing was indifferent. She didn't say anything, but Yin Liangji raised his eyes. His turbid eyes were filled with solemnity and indifference. He was clearly an old man who was so stooped that he had to worry about falling while walking, but now he seemed to be looking down at AI Qing. He was looking at his insensible great-granddaughter. "You're mocking my hypocrisy, aren't you, little Qing?" Yin Liangji said. "You're always obsessed with appearances, but you can't look at the big picture. I know what you want to say. It's nothing more than the unimportant moral condemnation that I've embezzled the Huai family's assets. To be honest, this should be the best decision I've made since Huai Guang's death. At the end of the day, isn't what I'm doing a normal business competition? Even if it's a competition that's dozens of times dirtier than this, there's still competition in the world, right? What do you think I should do when a fatal oversight suddenly appears between two parties that were originally closely tied together? Should I give up on my ambitious goal and let everyone sink together? Or should I sacrifice one person's last legacy to give the other a chance to succeed? Just because he used to be my friend, I can't buy over his business? Just because we were once friends, I don't deserve to succeed? If I let others do it, they'll only be colder and crueler than me. Compared to such a huge amount of assets, any kind of elegance and etiquette are insignificant. They'll only be more vicious and ugly. They won't even spare Wai Shi's life. That's right. I watched his parents reap the consequences of their own actions. In the end, they suffered the consequences of their own actions. But you have to be clear about one thing, little Qing. Whose pity is it that allowed him to live until now? AI Qing couldn't help but sneer. You can try to reason with him if you think he'll spare your life when the time comes. I will, even if you won't listen. The old man said calmly. For the family, comparing an old man who is nearing the end of his days and a new talent with a bright future, is there a need to talk about who is more important? I can kneel in front of him and beg for his forgiveness. I can put down my dignity and backbone, flatter him like a dog, endure the humiliation, and dry my face. If he's still angry, I can stretch my neck and let him chop me. It doesn't matter even if my bones are turned into ashes. But what can I do? Looking at AI Ching's stiff expression for a moment, he shook his head in disappointment. It's just one person who died. Is there a need to make a fuss about nothing? Little Ching, in addition to age, have you really grown a little bit over the years? If your perspective can't be raised, and you can't overlook the whole situation, no matter how smart you are, it's just quick-wittedness. It can't be called wisdom. And you're too smart, so smart that you're too smart. You've always made the most appropriate choice, but sometimes the most appropriate choice is often not the best. For example, you've already lost your best opportunity for revenge. Looking at little Ching's gloomy expression, the old man smiled regretfully. Even without me, the current Yin family wouldn't be able to recover from this setback, right? Didn't you see it too? That child, Inya, although he doesn't have your vision and wisdom as the head of the family, he's naturally magnanimous. Now that the Yin family has broken away from the bloody accumulation of capital, a benevolent and broad-minded young man is a more suitable candidate for the head of the family than an annoying old man like me. In other words, from the moment he advanced, the carefree revenge you're looking forward to is already meaningless, because from that moment on, my life and death has become an insignificant matter. The old man told her, sincerely, this is the meaning of the family. Little Ching, each of us is an insignificant speck of dust, but when the specks of dust gather together, they can make a difference and have meaning. We use our blood as a bond, trust, and authority, and hope to make up for our shortcomings and step onto a higher peak. For this goal, all the members can be sacrificed. He said, including your parents, including me. Crack! A furious shattering sound burst out from AI Ching's hand. The fountain pen broke, and the ink flowed out from her fingertips with a trace of dark red. The words from her great-grandfather carried a mocking tone that bordered on humiliation. It was a test. No, it should be said that it was an interrogation that left no room for negotiation. If the person standing in your way of revenge wasn't me, but the only brother who had ever taken care of you, Inya, what choice would you make? If one day Inya became Huaishir's enemy, how would you humiliatingly comply with the enemy's wishes and convince your revenge tool to only kill the evil leader? At that time, would this old thing do as he had said, stretch out his neck for the kill? No, there would only be more arrangements and more conspiracies waiting for her, right? You see, I've already told you. The old man looked at her helplessly. Chapter 300. After sitting in the chair for less than half an hour, Huaishir got drunk and fell on the table with a bang. He fell into a deep sleep. Then he had a dream. In the dream, there was the distant and melodious sound of a cello. It was as if he had returned to his childhood, playing with other children in the courtyard, chasing and playing. When he turned around, he saw the teacher leaning against the door, smiling and waving at them. She took out a handkerchief and wiped the snot and stains on Huaishir's face. The afternoon sun shone on the teacher's long hair, plating it with a layer of fleeting golden glow, making her smile gentle and blurry. Huaishir couldn't see her face clearly. His attention was all on the girl sitting alone behind the teacher. His cheeks turned red as he stared blankly at the girl sitting alone in the piano room behind the teacher. The teacher bent down, reached out, and pinched his face. Then he asked something. So he raised his head, puffed out his chest, and answered loudly, I want to be friends with Sister Xiaoqing. The teacher laughed. Holding his hand, they walked toward the lonely girl. The sound of the cello stopped abruptly, and the memory fragments were suddenly cut off. Huaisher opened his eyes, got up from the table again, and stared blankly at everything in front of him. The dream just now quickly dissipated in his memory. He couldn't remember the details, but he felt a sense of absurdity. It was like a fairy tale. The warm color was so extravagant in his childhood memory that it was almost unreal. Was it the excessive beautification of his subconscious or pure imagination? He wasn't sure. After a long time, he woke up slightly from the drunken stupor and confusion. He turned around and looked at Yu Dongri beside him, and finally his gaze fell on the wine glass in front of him. His eyes were filled with suspicion. What wine is this? He only drank a few mouthfuls, and he was already drunk. Oh, you woke up so quickly. Yu Dongri clicked his tongue in wonder. The special water of life produced by the Russian Federation's genealogy. It is said that even a stone will get drunk after drinking it. You just lay there for a while. Huaisher picked up the glass and sniffed it. Finally, he smelled the alcohol that was about to turn into poison under the cover of the bartender. His expression immediately twitched. After pouring away the glass of wine in disgust, he waved his hand and ordered a glass of juice before continuing to daydream. By the way, where were we? Oh, yes, Shambhala. Yu Dongri continued with a cigarette in his mouth. Shambhala is a great place. Not only is the climate suitable, the scenery is beautiful, and the beauty technology is top-notch. They have the best hot springs and spa in the world. For 3 years in a row, they have been voted the most suitable border for recuperation. Huaisher pressed on his throbbing forehead and could not hear anything clearly. He could only feel that the words went into his left ear and out his right ear. He really could not figure out what kind of place Shambhala was, but he did not want old Lu to explain it all by himself. Which country? Public sovereignty borders. Most of the borders nowadays are like this. They are developed and managed by a few local families or groups, forming a committee. Hey, I digress. Although it is not a gourmet city, there are still more than a dozen restaurants that are rated by the mouth of hunger, and the wine is also good. The last time I stayed there for a few days, I even grew a few more strands of hair. Speaking of this, old Lu's eyebrows twitched. He even parted his hair to show his hairline that was struggling to fight against fate. Huaisher's expression twitched, and he smiled awkwardly. It sounds great. And there are also beautiful girls. You know, girls, right? Old Lu took out his collection of photos and showed them to him. There are all kinds of girls, passionate and unrestrained American girls, determined and strong Russian Federation girls, cute Ingzhou girls, and even a lot of Egyptian noblewomen. It had to be said that although old Lu was a little unrestrained, his photography skills were still pretty good. Huaisher's eyes widened as she sucked in a breath of cold air. Wow, so good. You think that's it? Yu Dongri smiled mysteriously, picked up a tourism brochure from the side, and flipped through it quickly. A chain store set up by 16 workshops and Metatron Cube's offline store. There are all kinds of weapons. Most importantly, there is an exhibition of Cavendish's giant war robots. As he spoke, he turned directly to the last page and showed Huaisher a huge promotional poster that spanned across the page. It was a giant humanoid robot with a sword in its hand, and its eyes were shining with golden light. Oh. Huaisher's face was red with excitement, and his eyes were wide open. Old Lu still felt that it was not enough, and he raised his voice. In addition to 6 new types of jetpacks and weapons, the most important thing is that a lucky tourist will be selected to provide driving services. What the hell is this place? Is it heaven? Huaisher felt that his nose was about to bleed, and he wanted to jump into the poster. How is it? Yu Dongri closed the brochure and smiled mysteriously. I happen to have a customized ticket for a high-end tour here. Do you want to go together? Forget it. Huaisher sighed. Why? Yu Dongri's eyes widened. Are you crazy? There are giant robots, and you can drive them. Are you still a man? There are hot springs, young ladies, and giant robots, but what does that have to do with me? I just want to go back to XN High, go home, and sleep. Huaisher lowered his head to look at his phone, and he scrolled through the messages on the screen. I only took 2 days off, and it's already past the time. No matter what, I have to go back and ask AI Ching for a few more days, right? Yu Dongri did not say anything. By the way, why can't I contact AI Ching? Huaisher raised his head and stared at Yu Dongri's face. Do you have any clues? I've only been here for 2 days. How would I know? Maybe it's a closed-door training. This kind of thing happens often. Yu Dongri laughed. I'll help you ask for leave later. The plane will take off in an hour. Why don't we go first? No, I'm not going. Huaisher said calmly. You're hiding something from me. It's about AI Ching, right? Huaisher asked. Yu Dongri pretended not to hear him. He turned back to admire the young ladies in the bar, and he whistled nonchalantly. Then I'll ask OL Xiao directly. Huaisher pretended to make the call, but he was stopped by Yu Dongri in a hurry, and his expression was bitter. I say, why do you have to get involved in this mess? Huaisher was expressionless. You have to tell me what happened, right? How would I know? Yu Dongri's face was filled with grief and indignation. When he saw Huaisher's indifferent expression, he became even more indignant. I'm not lying to you. I really don't know. 2 days ago, Sister AI came to me and told me that the Yin family will most likely make a move on you. She told me to tell you to be patient. Now is not the time. She told me to take you abroad for a few days and come back after the storm passes. Her intuition is like a crow's beak. The more serious the situation, the more accurate it is. I don't dare to not believe her. Huaisher was stunned for a long time. Then, he heard the door in the distance being pushed open. An unfamiliar woman quickly walked in and looked around. When she saw Huaisher's table, she hurriedly rushed over and sat down while panting. She picked up the vodka that had just been served on the table and drank it in one gulp. Oh no, AI Ching is in trouble. Huaisher was stunned. Excuse me, who are you? She's still your colleague. AI Ching didn't mention her to you. Forget it. She doesn't look like someone who would introduce her friends to others. Chai Fei sighed helplessly. She glanced at Yu Dongri, then looked at Huaisher. An hour ago, she was suspended for investigation. She helped you cover up the Red Gloves incident. Later, when Green Day was implicated in the Jinling incident, the investigation team decided to suspend her duties for investigation. As a result, she was immediately taken away by the Yin family. Yu Dongri's expression twitched. He raised his hand and slapped his face, silently cursing. How did you find me here? He asked. Don't underestimate your best friend's intuition, okay? Chai Fei glanced at him. Just look at her call history, then compare it with the people she has contacted in the past 2 days. Finally, look at the location of Huaisher's phone, and you can confirm it, okay? After seeing the travel brochure and plane ticket next to Yu Dongri, she was stunned for a moment. Then she suddenly realized, wow, are you guys planning to run away? Isn't that too embarrassing? Yu Dongri had a bitter expression. Can I say that I'm innocent? Forget it. It doesn't matter if you guys stay or leave. Chai Fei pouted. She waved her hand and asked the waiter to serve the snack brand. Then she began to eat high-calorie food. Her mouth was full, and she said vaguely, anyway, as a friend, all I can do is to inform you guys. No, the main point is actually Huaisher over there. I can't do anything else. You're too shallow as a friend. The friends in the office are already very loyal to each other. Chai Fei glared at Yu Dongri. Also, aren't you a gigolo? You cheated so many innocent girls of their money, and you still have the right to criticize me. Yu Dongri, who was at the bottom of the chain of contempt, was speechless. If you ask me, Xiao Qing isn't the type to sit and wait for death. Also, the suspension document this time is too strange. Something might happen later. It's better for you guys to stay away. Chai Fei patted Huaishi's shoulder. If she didn't say anything to you, then it's best if you don't get involved. Wait, your surname is Huai? Huaishi nodded. Forget it. I'm afraid I came here for nothing. Chai Fei rubbed her forehead with a headache. That woman is crazy. I'm afraid the Yin family will really come for you this time. It's best if you go out and hide for a while. After a while, they won't be able to do anything to you. You're saying the Yin family wants to make an example of Huaishi? Yu Dongri was in disbelief. Why not? If we let him develop, then one day he will destroy our entire family? Chai Fei sneered. Even if there's pressure from the Social Security Bureau, there are still many ways. Don't you know how many ways there are to destroy a person? They don't have to do anything. They just have to let Huaishi seek his own death. For example, if you overestimate yourself and provoke the Yin family can't be blamed for fighting back, right? She threw the entire chicken wing into her mouth and swallowed it, including the skin and bones. Finally, she spat out the insignificant dregs into the trash can. So, this is her arrangement? Huaishi lowered his head and looked at the plane ticket next to Yu Dongri. He suddenly understood. Chai Fei nodded. There's something I haven't said before. Huaishi was silent for a long time and sighed softly. I really hate the way she acts as if everything is under her control. He picked up the glass and drank the juice and ice cubes inside. He chewed the hard ice cubes and swallowed them. The glass was gently placed on the coaster. The smooth rim of the glass reflected Huaishi's eyes. He said, I won't. TSK, Yu Dongri tilted his head and sighed. To be honest, I've had enough of her self-righteous arrangements and plans, even if I don't have the chance to tell her. Huaishi looked up and whispered to himself, who does she think she is? She has a cold face and doesn't even know how to smile at people. She only cares about making arrangements for others and thinks that it's good for others. There's something wrong with this woman from the beginning, right? Yu Dongri opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. So, I'm not leaving. Huaishi looked up at them. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to look for her and walk right into her trap. Are you crazy? Yu Dongri scratched his wig in annoyance and looked at him as if he was looking at a fool. Are you crazy because you're a prince? Do you think you can handle everything? In fact, I haven't handled anything. Huaishi replied calmly. Many times, I think I can handle it, but in the end, there are others who help me. When I do things impulsively, it often makes things worse. I thought I could save Luo Xian, but Luo Xian is still lying in the hospital. How can I have the face to think that I can save AI Qing? Then what are you after? You want to die? No, I just thought of it now. The young man sighed softly and couldn't help but laugh. I originally wanted to be good friends with her. Yu Dongri was stunned. From the first time I saw her, I told the teacher that I wanted to be friends with her. Huaishi lowered his head and couldn't help but laugh. Now that I think about it, she was exactly the same as she is now. She was prouder than anyone else, and she was also better than anyone else. She even played the piano better than us. She was always alone and never played games with others. Later, after we became familiar with each other, her attitude would occasionally become closer. She was like a wild cat, and people couldn't do anything about it. But she has always taken care of me. Even after knowing that there was a problem with me, she was still willing to be with me. Although there are many things that are not satisfactory, I still admire and like AI Ching very much. She is still willing to be my friend, so I can't leave, and I can't just leave her here alone. Huaishur said seriously, I will go find her, even if she doesn't want to. Yu Dongri asked expressionlessly, what if someone stops you? Then I'll deal with it, as I see fit. Huaishur shrugged. If possible, it would be best if I could kill her great-grandfather. While I'm at it, Yu Dongri asked, what if you don't come back? Then I won't go. Huaishur shrugged. I'll go home and sleep. There's everything in my dreams. Can't you just hope that I'll be better? I'm just reminding you not to avoid the objective reality. Yu Dongri said coldly. You have to think clearly. This time, no one will help you. Please don't say such things to a 17-year-old Chunibyu. Huaishur couldn't help but laugh. There are some things that must be done, right? Then I wish you a safe journey to the netherworld. Yu Dongri helplessly picked up the wine glass and drank the wine in the glass. He took out money and a tip and put it under the glass. I should go. Be careful. He turned and left. Chai Fei, who was next to him, looked at the two of them, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. Angry for a beauty. Young man, you have a bright future. Huaishur's eyes lit up. Then are you willing to help? I won't. Chai Fei shook her head and smiled slyly. If you want to be a hero, please do it yourself. Why make things difficult for a weak office clerk like me? By the way, can I order another fruit platter? No, thank you. I don't have the money to pay the bill. Huaishur shook his head and sighed. To be honest, I regretted it as soon as I said it. Can you help me call him back? I still want to see the super large robot. Chai Fei shrugged with a helpless look on her face. Come on, little brother. She clenched her hands and cheered Huaishur on. I have faith in you. Huaishur curled his lips, picked up his backpack, and got up to leave. You're on your way? Chai Fei was surprised. Go home, sober up, and sleep. Huaishur said grumpily and pushed the door open. The door closed, leaving Chai Fei sitting alone in the same place. She looked down at the messages on her phone. After a long time, her smile became more and more happy and proud. Oh, I really deserve to be called a golden best friend. Waiter, give me another fried chicken. It was a pity that without the cold eyes of her best friend to accompany her meal, she always felt that something was missing. I really hope nothing will happen. She sighed softly. Chapter 3:01. The next day, late at night, there were barely any people on the quiet streets. There were only the flickering lights of cigarettes in the alleys and the flashing lights of the vending machine. After Huaishur went back to the hotel yesterday, he slept for the entire night and most of the day. Then he used the room service to order a 10-person bucket and stayed in the hotel to watch 2 movies and half of a new show. After 6 o'clock in the evening, he went online to search for discount coupons for the latest FPS games. On a forum, he was arguing with someone about the balance of a mobile game. Just now, he asked Don Jihu if he needed to wear a suit to a formal event. By the time he wanted to buy one, he realized that it was already too late. Most of the stores in Jinling were closed. Now he was looking for the phone number of the nearest suit rental store. If you ask me, this little brother of yours is really amazing. He doesn't have the kind of sadness that you described at all. He is so depressed that he can't eat or sleep. His psychological quality is much better than a certain bald cowherd. When Yu Dongri heard the sarcastic words from the vending machine, his face twitched. He couldn't help but sigh. Can you stop insulting me? I think for a scumbag who still treats his ex-girlfriend as a tool after breaking up, these words are nothing but a breeze. What? Does he know how to write the word shame? Yu Dongri's face became more and more helpless. He endured the sarcastic words from his ex-girlfriend through the vending machine. When the cold voice on the other end finally vented her anger, he asked, I know you have a problem with me, but no matter what, I'm still your customer, right? Oh, so you don't want me to use my internal authority to help you get a discount? No, sister, I'm sorry. Yu Dongri's spine was bent by money. Just treat me as a scumbag and scold me a few more times. If you're happy, then you have the motivation to work. If you're not happy, then I'll scold him for you. That Lu guy is really a piece of shit. Humph, it's good that you know. The vending machine shook and a can of drink fell out. This is what you want. It's about what happened to the Yin family. After opening the can, a thick roll of paper slid out. As expected of tomorrow's news, Yu Dongri sighed. It's just that it's not very convenient to use this method all the time. Can't we find a place to talk face to face? The vending machine sneered. Forget it. I'm afraid I won't be able to resist the urge to cut your face a few times. In the silence, Yu Dongri sighed and looked down at the information on the paper. His face became more and more unsightly. Really? What do you think? The voice from the vending machine said coldly. If you want to talk about ugliness, I don't know how many things that happen in this kind of destitute family are dozens of times uglier than this. In order to maintain power, this is just a common occurrence, and there's no need to hide it at all. Anyway, only a meddlesome person like you would dig this kind of thing out from a pile of old books. It's so pitiful to be involved in something like this. That little girl, Yu Dongri, smoked and sighed softly. As he flipped through the records in his hands, he could almost imagine what had happened to the Yin clan 20 years ago, the changes that had completely pushed Ai Qing into the abyss she was in today. At that time, the Yin clan had already entered a period of rapid growth after taking control of many border crossings. Unfortunately, they had very few people. Compared to the large number of people in the clan, there were very few people who had the talent to ascend. Apart from those who had been recruited from outside, there was only one person who had ascended in that generation. No matter how much effort and preparation they had put in, ascension was still something that normal people could only hope for. Take Ai Qing's father, for example. He had been born with an abundance of origin substance and had the highest possibility of ascension among his peers. However, he had still been at the edge of that bottleneck for more than 10 years. After exhausting all of his hope, he had quietly retreated and was excluded from the core of the clan. A few years later, he married a famous cellist, and the couple's relationship was harmonious. After losing the qualifications to become an ascender, he instead found his own happiness in the world of ordinary people. And after getting married, he gave birth to a concubine. Not only had she inherited her father's abundance of origin substance, but she had also inherited her mother's outstanding talent in the cello. At that time, Yin Qing had lived a life far away from the Yin clan under her mother's insistence. In order to protect her daughter's life, as a mother, she didn't hesitate to go against the old man's wishes. In the end, she moved out of the Een clan and went to Sheen High, all for the sake of letting her daughter live a normal life. As a mother, she had already done everything she could. Until one day, the Een clan's only ascendant was seriously injured in a battle and didn't have long to live. Once he died, all of the Een clan's shares in the border crossings would fall into the hands of outsiders who had been drooling over them for a long time. Without ascension, they didn't have the qualifications to enter the picture. Yu Dong-ri smoked his cigarette as he squinted at the records on the paper. So, a car accident happened? Yes, a car accident without any accidents or problems. The cold voice from the vending machine said, "A family of 3 went to the zoo to celebrate their daughter's placing in the competition. On the way back, they collided with a truck that had malfunctioned. The scene was tragic, and the result was as you expected. When she woke up from the sudden dizziness and pain, she couldn't feel her lower body anymore. She started to cry and called for her mother subconsciously, but her mother didn't respond. Then she saw the pale face that had lost its breath. At the last moment before the collision, the woman who had jumped in front of her and blocked the impact for her. Bitter cries and death came suddenly, an out-and-out tragedy in the human world. In this sudden despair, the father who crawled out from the broken frame of the car hugged his wife who had lost her life. He cried his heart out, tears of despair, and he called her name. No one responded, but when his world fell apart and his heart was almost broken, the miracle that he had been looking forward to for a long time suddenly came to him. He finally crossed the threshold that was once too high to reach and welcomed ascension. Therefore, Ai Ching, who was swallowed by fear, saw the man who hugged his wife's body and cried his heart out. His expression twitched, and then an extremely ridiculous and extremely ugly smile of ecstasy appeared on his face. It was an ugly smile like that of a zombie. After watching the surveillance video of the vending machine, Yu Dongri fell into silence. After a long, long time, he lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth and sighed hoarsely. From that day on, she began to hate ascenders, right? She hated her father, hated the family that murdered her mother. After losing everything, she instinctively began to hate everything. But what was even more disgusting was that because of this, she discovered that she had the potential to ascend. If it weren't for this inner conflict and disgust, she would have already possessed a talent that surpassed her father. This world was like a cold joke to her. It was ridiculous and not worth mentioning. Yu Dongri shook his head in pity. I'm afraid it took all my strength to hold on until now. But what does this have to do with a bald cowherd like you? The vending machine asked indifferently, to what extent do you want to be involved before you give up? Or are you going to tell me that Huaisher is your long-lost brother? Yu Dongri was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but shake his head. Don't flatter him. He doesn't have as good looking as I do. After so many years, your narcissistic look is still disgusting. It's second only to when you want to hide something, such as now. The voice behind the vending machine became impatient. If I were you, I would go to Shambhala for surgery now. At least this way, you can live for a few more years instead of inexplicably dying on the street one day and causing trouble to passers-by. Don't be like this. Yu Dongri hesitated. In the end, he sighed helplessly. I just want to be a good person. If you want to be a good person, why don't you die early and donate your inheritance to the Border Children's Medical Fund? Chapter 3:02. The next day, in the morning, dark clouds covered the sky. On the purple-silver mountain outside of Jinling, there was a winding mountain road that led all the way to the huge villa at the top of the mountain. It looks like it's going to rain. In the back seat of the car, a girl stuck her head out and looked at the sky through the window. I think I see it. The Ean family is even higher up. Don't they find it troublesome? There's not even a supermarket in the wilderness. Wouldn't they have to drive for an hour just to buy a pack of tissues? Why would the Ean family need to go down the mountain to buy tissues? The brother next to her laughed. Xiaoying, remember not to joke around when you get to the Ean family. I'm just telling you to relax a little. Chuaying pouted. Second brother, what if the person you're going on a blind date with is a bad woman? I heard that woman is notorious in the astronomy club. Won't your family be disturbed? It's all the elders' idea. Otherwise, she wouldn't be interested in a blind person like me. Chuaying smiled indifferently. At most, we'll go our separate ways. Look, your third brother and his wife have a good relationship after marriage, right? That's an exception. Third brother has a good temper, but he still has to move out every now and then. Chuaying sighed. Uncle said that I should get married in a few years. You're still young. What are you thinking about? Chuaying raised her hand and flicked her little sister's forehead. Don't worry, I've already talked to Uncle. You can choose someone you like. As long as you don't get abducted by any random man outside once you're in love, it'll be fine. Second brother is the best. Chuaying cheered. She hugged her brother's arm and shook it vigorously. She only stopped when Chuaying couldn't take it anymore and pushed her away. After staying in the strict house for a long time, she was like a sparrow released from the wind when she came out. She looked at the scenery outside the window and pointed. In the end, she was stunned. There's someone in front of the mountain road. Beside the road, there was a figure in gray clothes slowly going up. He was holding an empty mineral water bottle in his hand. He looked lost and helpless. Who is it? Chuaying couldn't see and asked the driver. A young man, about 18 or 19 years old. He didn't take a car and walked up alone. The driver glanced at him and said, "He's an ascender. He should be going to the Ean family to celebrate the old master's birthday like us, right?" Second stage. Chuaying sensed for a moment and seemed to be a little startled, but soon his furrowed brows relaxed slightly. It's quite a gentle aura. It's not hostile to us. She looks pretty good too. Wait, stop the car. Chuaying leaned against the car window and looked at the young man's side profile. She was stunned for a moment and quickly shouted at the driver. What's wrong? Chuaying was puzzled. Why sure? Second brother. That's why sure. Chuaying turned her head, and her face was red with excitement. She spoke incoherently. It's the Prince of Paradise, the super handsome one. I even borrowed money from you to buy his card. Chuaying's expression twitched as he felt helpless. Uncle Lu stopped the car. He said, "Since we've met, I'll give you a ride. Who knows, I might even be able to get an autograph for my sister." Chuaying cheered. Then on the mountain road, Huaishe, who was looking at the navigation on his phone blankly, saw the car in front of him stop by the side of the road. The car window was rolled down, and an unfamiliar girl waved at him. "Are you Mr. Huai? If you're going to the Ean family, we'll give you a ride." "That's great." Huaishe was stunned, and then he was pleasantly surprised. He sped up and chased after her, and saw the door of the front passenger seat slowly open. Thank you. He sat in the car and thanked the driver and the two people in the back seat. I didn't expect the navigation to show a straight line. I didn't want to take a taxi because I was greedy. Sorry for the trouble. It's okay. We help each other when we're outside. Chuaying nodded politely, but Chuaying excitedly stuck her head out from behind. Her cheeks were red, and the way she looked at him made Huaishe a little scared. "Mr. Huaishe, would it be convenient for you to give me an autograph? Huh. Huaishir was stunned. When he saw the card and pen that she handed over, he immediately understood. He smiled bitterly and nodded. Okay, but to be honest, please don't expect too much from me. I'm not like how I was in the live broadcast. However, Cui Ying's eyes were still blinking, full of expectation. Huaishir sighed and took the pen and card. May I ask what your name is? Cui Ying. There's a jade under the grass character, headscarf. Okay. Huaishir put the card on his lap and then tried his best to write in his most authentic handwriting. Thank you, Miss Cui Ying, for giving me a ride. Huaishir. Cui Ying couldn't wait to take back the card, and then she laughed strangely. Then she quickly took out her phone and took several photos of Huaishir and herself and sent them to who knows where. Please don't take offense. Cui Ping coughed awkwardly. My little sister has been at home for a long time and hasn't gone out much. It's okay. To be honest, I'm quite happy to see that I'm so popular. Huaishir smiled shyly and asked casually, May I ask if the two of you are going to the Yin residence for a birthday celebration? Yes, we're going on a blind date. Cui Ying pouted helplessly and pointed at her brother. It's for my brother. Huaishir was stunned and then looked at him with pity. I have a feeling that your blind date will be very scary. Friend, you have to be careful. Cui Ping didn't know how to respond. Fortunately, it didn't take long for them to arrive at the villa in front. It was decorated with lanterns and streamers, and the atmosphere was jubilant. They could vaguely see that the parking lot in front of the villa was already full of cars, and there was even more traffic in front of the villa with people coming and going. What a big house! Huaishir leaned forward and tilted his head to look at the huge archway in the distance, and couldn't help but exclaim, Isn't this much bigger than my house? He really looked like a country bumpkin. Cui Ping was about to say something, but he heard Huaishir's voice. Okay, just put me down here. After all, I don't want to implicate you. Cui Ying looked up in confusion. Aren't you here for a birthday celebration? Huaishir opened the car door and smiled at Cui Ying. No, I'm here for a debt. The car door closed. He stood in place and waved his hand as he watched the car gradually disappear into the distance. Then he pressed the hilt of the sword of virtue beside his windbreaker, looked up, and walked towards the main entrance. After passing through the heavy traffic, he stood in front of the door. The butler waiting in front of the door bowed politely. Sir, please show me your birthday banquet invitation. Sorry, I don't seem to have that kind of thing. Huaishir shrugged and spread out his hands. The butler was stunned for a moment, but his expression didn't change. After all, he had worked in the Yin residence for so many years, and it was impossible for him to be ignorant. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Can you tell me your name so that I can inform them? Huaishir, the youth replied. The old butler quickly recalled this name in his mind. Soon, he looked up and asked, Is it Mr. Huai from the Astronomy Association? No. Huaishir shook his head and said calmly, It's that Huaishir from Xian Hai's Huai family. The old butler's expression changed slightly. He didn't have time to lose his composure and turned to walk inside. Not long after, a figure hurriedly came out from behind the door. It was Yin Yan, who hadn't been seen in a long time. When he saw Huaishir, his expression became worse. After looking around, he pulled on Huaishir's clothes and pulled him to the side. He lowered his voice and asked, You still dare to come here? Huaishir looked at his confused expression and couldn't help but want to laugh. Why do you look more anxious than me? Yin Yan rolled his eyes and glared at him. Do you know that it's easy for you to come today, but it's not so easy for you to leave now? Don't blame me for not reminding you. If I were you, I would turn around and leave right now. Don't make trouble for yourself. Huaishir shrugged. What if I insist on making trouble? Yin didn't say anything and just stared at him. After a long time, he chuckled and nodded. All right, I respect you as a man. I'll celebrate your death anniversary on this day next year. After saying this, he took a step back and pointed at the door, indicating for him to do as he pleased. Huaishe raised his hand and tidied up the windbreaker that he had messed up. He pointed at the suits that the guests were wearing. Is it okay if I'm not wearing formal clothes? If you want to die, it doesn't matter even if you're naked. Yin looked at him one last time, then turned and walked through the door. Under the curious and surprised gazes of all the guests, Huaishe shook his head and looked up at the cold door. He felt the premonition of death spread through his spine. He smiled slightly and stepped in. In the hall, Yin finally found Inya, who was in charge. After he whispered the situation, Inya froze on the spot. After thinking for a moment, he said in a deep voice, "I'll take him down with me. I'll bring him down the mountain later. We can't disturb the old master's birthday banquet." At this time, the butler who rushed back from behind wiped the sweat on his forehead and reported in a low voice, "The old master said that since he's here, he should make arrangements. Otherwise, people will say that our Yin family doesn't know etiquette." Inya was silent for a moment and didn't say anything. He turned and left. Yin stood in place and thought for a moment. He looked at his sisters who were walking in from the door and sneered. He was about to leave when he was stopped by one of the women. "Don't be in a hurry to leave, fourth brother," she asked. "I heard that the man that third sister likes is also here. You know where he is?" "Xing, you call me fourth brother. I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't provoke him." Yin lowered his head and whispered in his sister's ear, "Don't enter the morning hall before the old master's birthday is over. Wouldn't that be bad?" "Fourth brother, are you joking?" Xing sneered. "If you want to lick little nine, then lick it. Why do you have to scare me?" "Advice. Fourth brother has already advised you. If you want to die, I can't stop you." Yin pointed in the direction of the side hall. "He's over there. You better stay away. If you anger him, even your little wolf dog won't be able to protect you." When the man behind Xing heard him say this, his expression stiffened. He revealed an ugly expression, but he didn't say anything. "Don't think about being in the limelight and surpassing her." Yin took one last look at his sister and shook his head regretfully. "You can't compare to her." He turned and left, leaving Xing in place. Her expression gradually became ugly. Ignoring the chill around the hall, Huaishe raised his hand and pointed his middle finger in the direction of the second floor. But unexpectedly, the premonition of death that was like a knife on his back disappeared in an instant. He heard a light cough beside him. It was a young man holding a cane. He was the kind-hearted person who had once taken Huaishe on a journey, Chui Ping. He smiled gently. "Mr. Huai, is it convenient for us to talk?" Huaishe thought for a moment and shook his head. "To be honest, it's best if you don't know me. If you know why I'm here today, it doesn't matter if we don't know each other. I just don't want anything bad to happen." Chui Ping shrugged and waved at Huaishe, indicating for him to sit with him. "This is my sister's request. It's the first time I've seen my sister worship someone other than us brothers so much. To be honest, I don't feel good about it." Huaishe subconsciously turned his head and saw Chui Ping sneaking glances at him from the group of girls. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and scratch his head. Girls always have unrealistic dreams when they're young. They'll be fine when they grow up. Although I'm worried about my sister, I can be sure of one thing. She's not the kind of shallow girl who mindlessly chases after celebrities because they look good. 2 days ago, she kept telling me about the new talent competition. Unfortunately, my eyes aren't good, so I didn't watch. I just remembered that you were the third-place finisher. It's just a fluke. Huaisher lightly replied. Hearing that he wanted to keep a distance, the second young master of the Chui family didn't get angry or unhappy. After a few simple words, he calmly smiled and fell silent. In all fairness, this was a very likable man. Although his eyes were disabled, he didn't feel any resentment or darkness. His temperament was gentle, his speech was elegant, and he made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Even when he was silent, he didn't make people feel awkward and relaxed. It's just that the surrounding gazes really made people unhappy. Huaisher narrowed his eyes and stared at the reflection in the glass, the shadow lurking in the shadows of the hall spying on him. His finger tapped the hilt of the sword of virtue. Now, it seems that the arrangement for me is already on the way. I just don't know how AI Ching is doing. After coming in for so long, I still haven't seen her. Could it be that she's under house arrest according to the tradition? In the ticking sound of the clock, Huaisher lowered his eyes and quietly waited for the birthday banquet to begin. As his index finger tapped on the hilt of the sword, time passed by minute. Is he starting to make trouble? In the quiet reception room, after sending a guest away, an old man with a walking stick turned around and saw the shadow standing in the corner. After listening to his brief report, Yin Liangji nodded and couldn't help but sneer, "Don't worry about him. He's still too young. He's too arrogant and can't keep his cool. If he really wants to leave, I can't do anything to him for the time being. Since he came here without knowing his own strength, it's not up to him to decide whether he lives or dies. Have you arranged everything?" The shadow nodded. "Very good." After pondering for a moment, a cold light flashed in the old man's turbid eyes. "Watch him later. If he wants to make trouble, let him. The bigger the trouble, the better. When he's done, it's time to go. It doesn't matter if I lose face. No, it's better to make me lose face and be treated as a good-for-nothing old man. That way, I can complete the final handover more smoothly. Before I abdicate, I have to give up this worthless face and get rid of the last disaster for the younger generation." He narrowed his eyes and pondered for a long time. After confirming that there were no oversights, he nodded and rubbed his face in the mirror in the corner to make sure that he didn't show any signs of decline. He still looked radiant. After persevering for one last day, he could unload this heavy burden. "Master, the birthday banquet has been arranged." The butler knocked on the door and asked respectfully, "Can we start?" Yin Liangji thought for a moment and asked, "Did anything happen to Xiao Qing these few days?" "Third Miss has been staying in her room since she returned home. She didn't go out or contact the outside world. She didn't resist Master's orders and arrangements." The old butler replied, "I think that maybe she finally understood Master's painstaking efforts and started to be obedient. It doesn't matter whether she's obedient or not." Yin Liangji shook his head indifferently. He didn't care whether AI Ching had learned her lesson or what she planned to do. These few days, her self-righteous secret arrangements had never left his sight. When the time came, he would prepare a big surprise for his great-granddaughter. In the end, she still doesn't understand people's hearts. He sighed regretfully and raised his eyes. He ordered, "Start the banquet. Today is a big day for the family. Don't let the guests wait too long." The butler respectfully obeyed and turned to leave. 3 minutes later, the door of the banquet hall slowly opened. Under the guidance of the attendants, the guests began to enter. The old man, who had changed his clothes, looked energetic. He stood at the door and welcomed every guest who came. He smiled and thanked them. Soon, he saw the young man in front of him. "Why, sure?" the old man asked. The young man nodded and raised his eyes to look at the old man in front of him. He asked rudely, "In Liangji, you're a guest. Please come in. The old man raised his hand and stopped the younger generation behind him who wanted to get angry. He just smiled kindly at Huaishir. Later, our two families will talk about friendship. Okay. Huaishir nodded and stepped into the banquet hall. He let the cold premonition of death engulf him. Next to him, the attendant's head was about to shrink into his neck. He just wanted to pretend that he didn't see or hear anything. He quickly led the way, but halfway there, he was stopped by someone. No need to lead the way. He's sitting next to me. The man named Inya waved his hand and dismissed the attendant. He pointed to the seat next to him and asked the young man, "Is it convenient?" "It's close to the front row." I couldn't ask for more. Huaishir followed the advice and pulled out the chair. He sat steadily under the strange gaze of the brothers and sisters of the Yin family at the table. Yin glanced at Huaishir and pretended not to see it. He lowered his head and continued to play with the face cloth. Some people's eyes were cold, while others looked like they were ready to watch a monkey show. Their expressions were full of contempt and disdain. Huaishir's affection didn't change. He picked up the red wine that the waiter poured for him. After taking a sip, he asked in his usual country bumpkin tone, "Can you give me some happy water?" The waiter was stunned. After seeing Inya waving his hand, he hurriedly took a few steps back and stood in the corner. "You smoke?" Inya asked. "I'm still underage," Huaishir answered seriously. Then he took the cigarette from his hand. "It's time to smoke more." Inya was stunned. He couldn't help but smile and handed his lighter over. On the stage, a star that was often seen on TV was already singing. In the jubilant singing, all the hostility in the dark seemed to have melted away and became peaceful. "I'm little Qing's brother." Inya raised his head and looked at the performance on the stage. He suddenly said, "If you're willing to believe me, please sit here and finish this meal. I won't let anything happen to her." At the table, the other people's expressions changed. They wanted to say something, but after he swept his gaze over them, no one dared to be impudent in front of their big brother. "I believe you. Why wouldn't I believe you?" Huaishir looked at their miserable appearances and couldn't help but want to laugh. "Seeing your prestige, I believe you, but is it really that simple? You didn't say anything. Isn't it because you're only her brother that you're powerless in many things?" The youth asked indifferently. "Otherwise it wouldn't be to this extent, right?" Huaishir didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he told him bluntly, "I want to take away AI Qing. I want it today." Amidst the gentle singing, Inya was silent for a long time. He sighed softly. The suppressive hostility of a fourth stage ascendant fell on him without any concealment. "If that's the case, then I'm your enemy, Huaishir." "I know." Huaishir calmly nodded. Inya glanced at him one last time and warned, "If you act recklessly, you'll die here today." "I know that too," Huaishir replied with a smile. "Moreover, I'm probably already used to that kind of thing." The sword of virtue, leaning on the table, trembled slightly. A clear and melodious cry burst forth from the cacophony. The cracks on the scabbard spread because the sharp object was ready to strike. The song curled up and dissipated in a long, lingering rhythm. The guests raised their hands and offered their applause. Soon, the applause also stopped. Everyone's gaze fell on the front, on the old man who slowly stood up from his chair. "First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to celebrate this rotten old man's birthday." The smiling old man waved at the guests. In the jubilant atmosphere, his eyes seemed to inadvertently sweep over Huaishir. His smile was still kind. "Here, I have another happy matter to announce. But before that, I'd like to introduce everyone to my favorite great-grandson, AI Qing." In the applause, the old man turned his head and looked at the door behind him. As the door opened, the girl in the wheelchair, pushed by the servant, came in front of everyone. Huaisha raised his eyes, slightly startled. She didn't look as sad and emaciated as he imagined. Her expression was as calm as ever, and she even looked a little chubbier. Her face had a rosy luster. When she raised her face, she gave a polite smile to the guests. Even though it was just a smile, it made people unable to move their eyes away. There was a kind of sickly beauty that made people feel tender affection for her. Not far away, Chueying was already stunned. Her eyes were wide open, and she kept tugging at her second brother's sleeve. But she couldn't say anything. She originally wanted to slander Ai Qing's appearance in front of Cui Ping, but after seeing the real person, she couldn't say anything. She smiled calmly, walked between the guests, and politely nodded to the guests. When she passed by Huaisha, her eyes didn't stop, as if she was looking at a stranger. Huaisha wanted to open his mouth to speak, but when she glanced at him, he was stunned and couldn't say anything. In this way, he watched her leave him, little by little going to the front, and finally to her great-grandfather's side. "Sorry, I'm a little late." She apologized to the guests naturally and graciously, and raised a small palm-sized box in her hand. "The gift for the old man has arrived. I went to get it." Soon, in the hands of the servant, the gift box was opened, and the bright light illuminated everyone's eyes. In the velvet cushion in the center of the box, there was a bright crystal the size of the knuckle of the little finger. The delicate gem glowed with soft and warm light, and the faint sound of hymns sounded from the air. The sacred and pure melody played in everyone's ears. Divine light of grace. Some people had recognized precious treasure from Rome, and they couldn't believe it. A faith crystal that could save lives, and not inferior to an expensive consumable of a high-level stigmata. As long as it was worn close to the body, there was no doubt that it was a miracle gem that could save one's life. After a brief moment of astonishment, there was congratulatory applause and blessings. Even the old man was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed. He reached out and patted Ai Qing's shoulder, and his old heart was comforted. "It seems that my great-granddaughter has grown up and knows how to care for your great-grandfather." Whether this was Ai Qing's performance of bowing her head and admitting defeat, or if she had other plans, he didn't mind at all. As long as she could have a little sense of belonging to the family, it was enough. Even if it was a performance, it didn't matter. Wasn't most things in this world a performance? As long as the old man is happy. Ai Qing smiled, raised her hand, and took off the bracelet on her wrist. Then she got up from the wheelchair and stood in front of her great-grandfather. As the silver bracelet came off, waves of origin substance emerged from her body. She reached out and picked up the divine light of grace in the box, and the power from her soul enveloped the crystal condensed by the miracle. Between her 5 fingers, the shadow of a handgun slowly emerged, aimed at the old man's face. Yin Liangji's smile stiffened. In the brief moment of silence, Ai Qing thought for a moment and said seriously, "I wish you a long life, great-grandfather." Bang! There was a soft sound. She pulled the trigger. The crystallization of faith turned into bullets of calamity. Blazing radiance burst forth and vanished in a flash, easily tearing apart the defenses and obstacles in front of them. Immediately afterwards, blood spurted out, dyeing her palms and cheeks red. In the dead silence, Yin Liangji fell on his back. There was no more sound. Only the young girl, who was no longer smiling, raised her face, and a brilliant flame appeared in her green-gold eyes, looking down at the pair of eyes that had been stunned until death. After 7 long years of waiting, her origin substance was finally released from its shackles, revealing its appearance here. Soul, eye of liberation. She was free. Chapter 304. In the sudden silence, everyone was stunned. Not only did the already dead Yin Liangji not react, even Inya and the Third Order Sublimata who had been secretly protecting Yin Liangji did not expect this at all. When all the guards were locked onto Huai Shi, Ai Qing became a sublimator. Ai Qing drew her gun, and Ai Qing pulled the trigger. First blood. The miracle of the divine light of grace was perfectly transformed into a fleeting and violent power. The miracle of bringing life pierced through one's head, instantly tearing apart one's will, destroying any trace of consciousness, and bringing about a perfect death. Along with the sound of gunfire and the spread of blood, there was an indescribable sense of absurdity. A scene that was enough to shock the loving mothers of all the guests for an entire year suddenly appeared. Just like death itself. Blood dripped from her fingertips. Ai Qing lowered her pair of bright eyes, coldly staring at her great-grandfather's lifeless face. She wondered if he had comprehended his great-granddaughter's growth at the very last moment. Since a month ago, when the damned premonition came, she had been silently preparing for this moment. Among the countless plans she had prepared for this, it had never been so smooth and natural. Natural and smooth. It was as if she was born to be like this. She fulfilled the mission that was given to her from the day her mother passed away, without any mistakes. She finally had the courage that Huai Shi had envied. In such a decisive and intense way, she ended the old ghost who had controlled her for half her life. It was all over. Whether it was a conspiracy or revenge, the grudge between the Huai clan and the Yin clan would come to an end with this shot. When she woke up from the calmness that had frightened her, she breathed out the last of the uneasiness in her heart. She finally experienced the peace and relaxation that Huai Shi had once described. So happy! She whispered softly, her blood-stained cheeks curved into a smile. It came from the bottom of her heart, causing her originally excessively pale and sickly face to become lively and lively. She felt her heartbeat and pulse, as well as her intoxicating breathing. She was still alive. He could finally live for himself. Then she heard a roar that broke the dead silence. Impudent! With anger and shock that anyone who wasn't deaf could understand, a figure suddenly rushed forward, grabbed her hand, and violently pressed her to the ground. Huai Shi's eyes widened in righteous indignation as he angrily rebuked, "That's insane! How dare you murder such a respected old man in front of me, a member of the Astronomical Society?" A pair of handcuffs that had just been made were fastened on her hands that were tied behind her back. Before anyone could react, Huai Shi had already pressed down on Ai Qing and announced in a trembling voice, "The suspect is Ai Qing, the inspector of the Astronomy Society stationed in Xianhai. You are under arrest." As he spoke, he raised his head and flung out his Astronomy Association ID. He drew his sword and glared at the crowd. Heaven's net has a wide net, but nothing escapes it. Are there any of her accomplices here? If you want to violently resist the law, quickly step forward. A passing member of the Astronomical Society stepped forward after encountering such a cruel murder case, and quickly arrested the suspect, Ai Qing. This demonstrated the terrifying efficiency and dignity of the Astronomical Society that could not be underestimated. It was simply awe-inspiring. If it wasn't for the fact that the faces of the Yin family members looked like they had eaten *T. In this continuous shock, someone subconsciously raised his hand and said, "Wait a minute, I think," bang, an invisible heavy axe penetrated from Huai Shi's hand and deeply wedged into the wall next to his head. Huai Shi looked at him coldly. "What do you want to turn yourself in?" So that person immediately shut up. In the dead silence, Cui Ying looked around blankly, still unable to react. She opened her mouth to speak, but Cui Ping suddenly pressed on her shoulder. "Second brother, don't talk. Don't get involved in the Astronomical Society's business. In just a few seconds, this Chui family's horse had already understood the cause and effect and made a decision. Huai Shi had already used the Astronomical Society's name to arrest criminal members, so this matter had become a family affair of the Astronomical Society in disguise. The victim just happened to be a member of the Yin family. If he wanted to speak up and get involved, he had to consider whether he had the weight to please both sides. At this time, other than the Yin family members who could stop it, only the higher-ups of the Astronomical Society could speak up. But was there anyone from the Astronomical Society here? Yes, there was the nemesis of crime, the inspector of Xinhai, AI Qing. There was also Huai Shi, a member of the Xinhai operation, a prince of paradise, a disaster musician, an official culinary demon, and a legendary investigator. He was also a golden cowherd. Huai Shi, there was no one who could expose Huai Shi's tiger skin. After using the fastest reaction speed to obtain the right to dispose of AI Qing, Huai Shi looked around coldly. He roughly pulled AI Qing up and took a step back, then another step, stepping over the gradually cold corpse on the ground. The expressions of all the Yin family members present changed. On the round table, Yin Xing's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak. Beside her, Yin Yen picked up a plate expressionlessly and slammed it on his cousin's face, stuffing her bullshit words back into her stomach. In this situation, there's no place for you to embarrass yourself. Yin did not speak. He only silently stared at AI Qing in Huai Shi's hand. AI Qing was also looking at him, her expression calm. At such a close distance, being stared at by a level 4 ascendant, Huai Shi felt like there was a blade on his back, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. As long as Yin wanted to, he could kill Huai Shi on the spot with a flick of his finger, but he did not make a move, nor did he speak. He only looked at his most beloved sister, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. He condensed a violent killing intent to her neck, but he could not do it. Huai Shi raised his hand and stood in front of AI Qing. His sharp gaze swept over Qin Wentian's body. Wherever his gaze passed, his flesh and blood would be torn apart before quickly closing up again. Only fresh blood could be seen dripping down. A jade-green ghost fire ignited in his eyes. Facing an invincible enemy, Hill Ghost had already made his choice. In that instant, the furious shadows in the darkness suddenly converged into a torrent, rising up like a tsunami. Countless shadows collided, rubbing against each other and shooting out sparks. A peak level 3 ascendant, the shadow guard from the graveyard of the returnless, the gate of benevolence, had attacked in rage. The darkness rumbled, and the condensed shadows intertwined with each other, turning into a cage that instantly swallowed Huai Shi and the others. Countless shadows took on a physical form, strangling and closing in. Pa! There was a soft sound. It was like an illusion. In that instant, the entire banquet hall trembled slightly, and a small crack appeared in the wall. An extremely thin and dim bolt of lightning flashed, sinking into the surging tide of shadows. The next moment, amidst the rumbling of the wall collapsing, a shrill roar burst out from the tide of shadows, piercing everyone's eardrums. The layers of darkness suddenly collapsed, as if struck by an invisible hammer. On the walls of the hall, the broken bricks suddenly collapsed like gravel, leaving only a large circular hole with a diameter of several meters, nesting the crack in the tide of shadows. The bolt of lightning slowly dissipated, whether it was the heavy shadows, the condensed power, or even the soul and stigmata of the furious level 3 ascendant. They were all pierced by the alchemy bullet that came from far away. It exploded with a loud bang. Viscous blood splattered and spread out. The mutilated headless corpse fell to the ground, landing next to Yin Liangji's corpse, to accompany him to the afterlife. On a mountaintop more than 10 kilometers away, in the forest behind a huge sniper rifle that was more than 2 meters long. A bald cowherd, who didn't want to reveal his name, pulled the bolt, ejected the bullet, and loaded a crystal-like alchemy bullet into the chamber. The finger that was placed on the trigger had already ruptured, and blood was seeping out. Even with several layers of shock-absorbing equipment, the sharp pain spread from his shoulder. Right now, his body was no longer able to withstand the recoil of this terrifying weapon. "Little sister, you have the guts to walk forward. Don't look back. Don't look back." Yu Dongri stared at the X-ray image in the sniper scope, tilted his head, lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth, and hummed an out-of-tune ballad. He opened the notebook next to him and typed in the updated data changes. The distance was corrected again. The wind speed was measured. The wind direction was south. The air pressure was unchanged. The temperature was normal. He put it into the formula, did the complicated calculations, and finally deducted the deviation caused by the Earth's rotation speed. In the sniper scope, the crosshair began to adjust and change subtly. He was ready again. He laughed softly. "Don't be afraid. Big Brother will protect you. See, don't act rashly. This place has been surrounded by our astronomy club." Although he didn't know what had happened, Huaishur still intended to leave some harsh words here. Taking advantage of the chaos, he retreated to the outermost side of the hall with AI Ching and kicked open the door. Sunlight rushed in like a waterfall, stinging everyone's eyes. Then he waved his sword, and a white horse from the paradise came over with a majestic pace. Casually, he threw AI Ching onto the horse's back. Huaishur took one last look at Inya, got on the horse, pulled the reins, and prepared to leave. 15 minutes. He heard Inya's voice behind him. "Little Ching, this is the last sibling relationship I have with you." In the deepest part of the banquet hall, Inya sat on a chair with his back to them, and finally said, "After 15 minutes, the Yin family and you will fight to the death." AI Ching smiled and didn't say anything. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. He pulled the reins, and the white horse neighed and galloped down the mountain. The sound of horse hooves gradually faded into the distance. In the dead silence, no one spoke again. "Dear guests, I'm very sorry for encountering such an unfortunate thing after coming all the way here." Inya said softly, "The Yin family can't entertain guests today. Please help yourselves. I'll come to apologize another day." The guests, who were finally released from suffocation, surged and quickly left in the direction of the gate. "After collecting great-grandfather's body, you guys should go back and rest first." He raised his eyes and looked at his uncles and siblings. "Fourth grandpa is old and wise. I'll have to trouble you with great-grandfather's funeral. As for the others, watch your hands and mouth. Don't embarrass yourself." Inya nodded and took the lead to leave. The other young people followed in a hurry. Only from a distance did they hear crying. It was unknown whether it was from sadness or fear. In the end, Inya sat quietly in the empty banquet hall and stared at the blood on the ground. After a long, long time, he lowered his head, picked up his phone, and dialed the number he had dialed a long time ago. After 3 busy tones, the call was connected. "Reward, AI Ching." Inya paused for a moment and opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, his lips were tightly pursed, and he didn't want to speak. The call was connected, and the person on the other end waited quietly and calmly until a hoarse voice came. "Quota, $400 million US. Inya closed his eyes. Dead or alive? The call was hung up. Chapter 305. Noon, 12:45 a.m. 3:45 a.m. A terrifying bounty that had not been seen in the past 6 years spread like wildfire through all of the channels in the collection of 10,000 sins. After taking a tenth of the bounty, the largest intermediary platform in the dark side of the sublimata world, took all of the bounty and sent it to the eastern part of Dongsha. The bounty of death notices turned into pop-up windows and text messages that appeared in the phones of every registered person in Dongsha. It didn't matter if they were sublimators or not, where they worked or who they were. More notices were sent out in all directions through the dark net, delivering the notice of a high reward to every senior member. $400 million. Dozens of actuaries completed the liquidation of the bounty within half an hour. They converted 1/3 of the shares in the border region into cash, no more, no less, and began to transfer and purchase them. Enough money to allow an sublimator to live a luxurious life for the rest of their lives had been poured into the bounty pool. As long as the bounty target was brought to a place that even had a Wi-Fi connection to the collection of 10,000 sins, they would be able to obtain this sum of money. When the pop-up window appeared on the screen, there was a brief moment of silence, followed by a wave of commotion. So that's how it is. In a short 3 minutes, the entire process was laid out on eldest cousin's desk. Zhu Hongchen flipped through the report in shock for a long time before he couldn't help but laugh self-mockingly. Should I call him resolute and decisive, or rash and reckless? But no matter what, it's still very satisfying. Can you stop watching the show? Doom third side, and slammed another stack of reports on the table in front of him. 10 minutes ago, the Chainsaw Ghoul entered the Discovery realm. Apparently, the Eye of Nightmares is also showing signs of activity. The border sensors have also captured the movements of 6 other wanted criminals, as well as more than 16 border mercenary groups. This is within Dongsha's territory, and it's heading towards our territory. You can't possibly not react at all, right? React? What kind of reaction do you want? Eldest cousin was amused and turned to look at her. Shouldn't we do what we should do? Those who break the law will be captured, and those who are guilty will be killed. Those who dare to resist will be served with missiles and mortars. Those who are captured dead will be sent to Jixia as specimens. Those who are captured alive will be sent to Jixia as test subjects. As for those who haven't broken the law in Dongsha, what can we do? Are they prohibited from entering the country? Are we just going to ignore everything? Yes, of course. Big cousin spun the lighter between his fingers. As we all know, Dongsha is a place that prohibits individuals from possessing firearms and knives. I really hope they don't carry any prohibited items. As he spoke, he couldn't help but chuckle softly. I really like this young man. Why, sure. Look at him. He alone has created so many collective third-class merits for us. There are even pictures of this year's advanced role models. Go and see if there's anyone else who hasn't hitchhiked before. Hurry up and catch them. Once the fishing season is over, it'll be hard to catch them. While Big Cousin was laughing happily in the huge underground facility of the Jinling Social Security Bureau, lights lit up one by one and hurried footsteps ran in all directions. The largest sublimata violence mechanism in the entire eastern part of Dongsha was operating at full force, full of anticipation. More ascendants, more assassins, and more border mercenaries were like flies in the latrine, bamboo shoots after the rain, and customers outside the supermarkets on Black Friday. They kept making their moves. Under the temptation of the 400 million reward, which was directly linked to the huge reward of source form crystals, they flocked over. Half an hour later, in the wilderness, Huai Shi expressionlessly pulled the axe out of the head of the guy who had just drilled out of the ground. Then he turned around and picked through the messy corpses on the ground. He pulled out a usable shotgun, hung it on the saddle, pulled the white horse's reins, and continued forward. On the horse's back, Ai Ching raised her eyes to recognize the sunlight with a calm expression. Jinling isn't in this direction. She asked, "You're not sending me to the astronomy meeting? Defection is a heavier crime than murder. You understand?" Huaisher didn't say anything and continued forward. "This is only the first batch of people who moved the fastest. Even if my cousin doesn't do it himself, he will definitely set up a reward. More and more people will come to our door later." The woman on the horse raised her eyes and stared straight at the sun, as if she could see the countless satellites in low Earth orbit aimed at them. She waved her hand slightly. "Where are you going to take me?" AI Ching asked. "The nearest public border entrance is at least 200 kilometers away from here. Or do you just want to elope with me?" Huaisher ignored her. She paused for a moment, and her expression became subtle. She seemed to be smiling. "You know I was supposed to get engaged today, right? If I didn't come, your funeral would have been held today." Huaisher replied, indifferently, "Don't imagine that someone will come back and blow up the axle of your wedding car. A woman like you won't be able to get married." AI Ching's expression didn't change. She just asked calmly, "I just want to consult Mr. Huaisher of the astronomy meeting about the escape plan." "Just shut up." Huaisher turned his head. For the first time since leaving the Yin family, he looked into AI Ching's eyes and told her word by word, "Don't talk anymore." AI Ching seemed to have caught a glimpse of the anger in those eyes. It was rare for her to be obedient. She didn't say anything else. Or rather, she already knew the answer. She raised her head and faced the wind blowing from afar. Her long hair fluttered in the wind. The wilderness seemed to be endless. There was no end in sight. "It's so free." AI Ching whispered softly, "Even if this freedom was so illusory and short." In the distance, smoke and dust rose. An off-road vehicle crossed the mountains and whistled over. It stopped in front of the white horse. The middle-aged man driving the car stared at the two through the glass. He lowered his head and looked at his phone, comparing it with the photo on it. He pushed open the door and got out. He pulled out a heavy halberd from the back of the car and held it with both hands. He blocked in front of the white horse. "Don't block the way." Huaisher's hand pressed on the sword of virtue. "I was just lucky and happened to be camping nearby. There are more people behind," the man with the halberd replied. "Even if I make way, you can't pass." "So, you won't let me?" "So, why don't you let me try?" A phantom appeared behind the ascendant who blocked the way. An identical version of himself walked out from the body, holding the same halberd. There was no difference between them. Dongxia genealogy, Tantai Jiao. The two figures who looked like twins said in unison, "If you really have the confidence to take her away, you might as well treat this as a warm-up." Huaisher stepped forward, pulled out the sword of virtue, and stepped forward to meet the two phantoms who were fading at the same time. At that moment, two overlapping roars burst out. With a roar, the two figures of Tantai Jiao instantly disappeared from where they were. They plowed a deep crack in the ground and pointed straight at Huaisher. The halberd screeched and set off a mournful howl from the almost identical resonance. The iron light flashed and disappeared. Huaisher raised his wrist, and the blade slashed down. Forward! He sheathed the sword. Behind him, the two figures slid to the ground. A crack appeared on the halberd in their hands and on their chests at the same time. And in the air in front of Huaisher, blood spurted out. The real Tantai Jiao staggered back. She couldn't believe how Huaisher saw through the real doppelganger created by the combination of her soul power and the impermanence's stigmata. After holding your breath, the sound of your pulse became louder. Huaisher raised his hand and rubbed his ears. "It hurt my ears." Tantai Jiao froze for a moment, then fell to the ground with a bitter smile. "Thank you for showing mercy." "No, you're too weak." I can still hold back. Huaishir turned around, took the reins of the white horse, and continued forward. He heard Tantai Jiao's voice behind him. There are still people waiting for you ahead. Huaishir, you can't go far. Huaishir's footsteps paused for a moment. He didn't speak and continued forward, after flowing through the stream. He saw the figures sitting on the shore, waiting for a long time. It was unexpectedly familiar. I see Amber in here. The long-lost girl closed the lid of the lunchbox and looked up with a smile. You know I'm a border hunter, right? There are many missions. Huaishir said. It doesn't have to be this one. Amber shook her head. But I need money. I can give it to you. Huaishir tried to negotiate. Even if you don't think it's enough, with my current status, I can still borrow a lot. You're working so hard for your boss. Li Jian glanced at Ai Qing on horseback and smiled mischievously. Unfortunately, I don't want the money you're giving me. She slowly got up and casually hung her coat on a branch nearby, revealing the sports vest inside and the sword belt hanging at her waist. There were 2 katanas and a wakizashi. Don't you want to wait? Huaishir asked. I beat Luo Xian. Are you sure you can do it like this? A victory won't count as a victory won't be counted. Don't be too proud. Huaishir. Amber shook her head and slowly pushed the katana out of the sheath with her thumb. Her smile became sweeter. By the way, there's actually no need to wait. She said, because there are too many people, we discussed it and decided to go in order. I'm the luckiest. I'm second. Huaishir couldn't help but laugh. He looked around and vaguely saw a few figures waiting in the depths of the forest. His eyes became mocking. You're going to beat me like this? Yes. Amber nodded. A clear voice burst out from the sheath and stung Huaishir's eardrums. She said, I'm going to beat you. In an instant, she was close by. It was the same as Huaishir's. You step. No, it was even more mature and efficient than Huaishir's you step. After combining the steps of Ingzhou's swordsmanship, it had taken on a different appearance. After discarding the other unimportant elements, only the most violent explosive power was left. Using all the strength in the body, gathering into a beam, integrating the strength that had long surpassed the imagination of ordinary people into the skills that had been tempered thousands of times. In an instant, the katana was unsheathed. Separated by 5 steps, the blade that was originally only a little more than 3 feet suddenly grew to more than 2 meters. However, the speed became more and more astonishing as it was swung. It was as bright as a shooting star. In an instant, the light tore through people's eyes. Revolving Heaven's Sword Dance Combo. Chapter 306. A mournful sound suddenly burst forth. From Huaishir's hand, the spear of compassion shot forward, the cross-shaped spear blade blocking the sword's slashing trajectory without any warning. But then he saw the blade suddenly shrink, instantly shrinking by a meter without any reason. After bypassing the spear's interception without any obstruction, it shot out like a viper. Huaishir leaned back and saw the sharp blade sweep past the tip of his nose. When he abruptly propped himself up, he saw the blade that swept past him suddenly shrink again. The originally astonishing speed actually increased once more. From Hupo's spin, it drew an arc lightly and chopped down from top to bottom. This time, following the slashing of the blade, not only did its length increase explosively, even its weight increased by 10 to 20 times. The sound of air being torn apart exploded. Bang! The axe of wrath was lifted up and collided with the blade. Huaishir actually felt a wave of numbness in his hand. But Hupo's movements didn't stop. Her feet crossed, and she took a step forward, borrowing the momentum from her nimble spin to sweep across again. The strength of the blade was even greater than before. The sound of metal colliding continuously burst forth. Huaishur retreated pathetically, but Hoopa stepped forward step by step. It was as if she was dancing, waving her sword in her crisscrossing footsteps. This was a sword dance that was formed by the combination of a sword technique that had been brought to the point of perfection and soul power. This power was endlessly stacked and transformed into a sword dance. The sword dance continued. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. The more she dodged, the more terrifying the strength of the sword dance became. From the spinning of heaven and earth, it established an unstoppable strength. From the moment the sword dance began, the initiative was already in her hands. By the time Huaishur understood what was going on, a green hue had already spread all over her arm. She swung her axe with all her might, creating an insignificant gap in the sword dance. Huaishur drove straight in, ignoring the rapidly shrinking blade that doubled in weight. The strength of the drummer burst forth, bombarding her abdomen at close range. Boom! A blood-red armor appeared on her body without any warning, forcibly taking on Huaishur's punch that was like a pile driver. Inside, the amber roared and pulled out another tachi from its sheath. Drawing the sword, the power gathered in the sword dance followed the guidance of the arm and poured into the blade of the tachi. The power that had been accumulated for a long time turned into an invincible speed, bursting out from the scabbard. A fierce light flashed. Huaishur took a step back, and cracks appeared on the sacrificial knife. Not only was his defensive stance broken, but he was also about to lose his grip on the hilt of his sword. "It's over, Huaishur!" Inside, Hoopa roared and swung his twin swords. "Yes, it's over." At the last moment, Huaishur heaved a sigh of relief and forcibly raised the sword of virtue. The powerful chop was blocked by the sword of virtue. It was a piece of cake. There was only a crisp sound. Slap! The 2 sabers left his hands. Hoopa staggered back and fell to the ground, gasping for breath with all her might. It was only now that she saw the irises that had grown out of nowhere under her feet. They were so pure white and beautiful. Too despicable. She took off her helmet and raised her head with difficulty. "You actually used poison." Huaishur casually applied a layer of silver blood potion on the wound between his thumb and index finger. He shrugged slightly and looked at her with pity. "Girl, times have changed." As he spoke, he raised his hand and knocked on the back of her neck. It was over. Huaishur turned around and wanted to lead the horse, but he suddenly felt a premonition of death behind him. He suddenly turned back, stretched out his hand, and clenched his 5 fingers. He grabbed the arrow that was whistling towards him. Between his 5 fingers, the arrow was still buzzing, and the tip was only a hair's breadth away from Huaishur's eyes. In the depths of the forest, the gray-robed figure didn't hit the target. He immediately pulled out an arrow stuck in the ground beside his feet and shot again. The arrow's trajectory was erratic and strange, like a ghost appearing and disappearing from the dense forest. It was already right in front of him, but for some reason, Huaishur felt that the other party's actions were simply childish to the point of somewhat comical. Even if he had never touched that kind of weapon, he instinctively felt that the bow wasn't used like that. Bang! The sword of virtue swept across, directly cutting the arrow that had strangely appeared behind his head in 2. In the next instant, Huaishur's figure had already disappeared from where he was, submerging into the dense forest. The dark green flames of the mountain ghost instantly ignited from his body. The gray-robed man was stunned for a moment. He actually carried his bow on his back, turned around, and fled. It looked like he wanted to fight a prolonged guerrilla war with Huaishur. Unfortunately, in the dense forest, guerrilla war with a mountain ghost? Are you sure you're not mistaken? In the blink of an eye, Huaishur had already flown out from the thistles and thorns. With a sudden swing of his sword, he nailed the gray-robed man to the tree trunk. Then he heard a crackling sound beside him. In the darkness, the originally empty scene instantly shattered, revealing a dozen figures hidden behind the encirclement, as well as the automatic weapons in their hands that had already been unlocked. Huaishir was stunned for a moment. He looked back at the twitching archer on the tree trunk and immediately understood. An ambush! In the next instant, the gunfire of the mercenaries at the border burst forth. In the depths of the dense forest, there were continuous loud noises, as if bombs were constantly being detonated. On the white horse, Ai Qing quietly looked at the thick smoke rising from the forest in the distance. But soon, she turned her head slightly and looked behind her. Her slender eyebrows raised slightly. "Didn't you say to come one by one?" "Originally, that's what I said." A stooped old man was dragging a heavy chainsaw behind him. Ai Qing looked over, and under his excessively sparse white hair, he squeezed out a wriggling smile on his ugly face. He chuckled strangely, but I don't agree. The chainsaw that he was dragging behind him still carried the stench of blood and broken bone fragments. It was as if countless people's screams were entangled in it. Layers of suspicious leather were wrapped around the handle. It was almost emitting substantial resentment and hostility. There was no doubt that it was a border relic that was close to evil. Even if it had been stained with blood not long ago, it was still crying out hungrily at this moment. The white horse turned slightly and let out a low roar. Its eyes were vigilant. The iron hooves under its feet knocked on the rocks intermittently, and sparks burst forth. It exhaled hot breaths. It was as if a charge was imminent. "Ah, it seems that he has really left." The stooped old man who dragged the chainsaw chuckled. His expression twitched, and his pupils, which had shrunk to the size of a needle, stared at Ai Qing. He panted roughly. 400 million, 400 million, and it doesn't matter if he's dead or alive. Such good meat, child, such good meat." In his hand, the chainsaw suddenly roared hungrily. It spun wildly, and blood spurted out from the chainsaw. "Chainsaw ghoul, Horgus?" The woman on the horse raised her eyebrows, as if she was surprised by her current charm. "Are you really sure that I have no power to resist?" Yes, please resist at will." Horgus laughed sharply. He grinned, revealing his sharp teeth that still had food residue hanging on them. "This child is quite fond of struggling prey." The chainsaw roared. So, Ai Qing nodded. "Okay." At that moment, the white horse neighed. Under the control of Ai Qing's horsemanship, which was obviously much better than Huaishir's, it galloped forward. It raised its iron hooves to face the spinning chainsaw. Its huge eyes were full of disdain. "I'll kick you to death, you old pervert." In an instant, Horgus collapsed into a stinking mist. It suddenly boiled, swept past the white horse, and reformed in midair. It was the chainsaw that slashed down on Ai Qing's face. Ai Qing was expressionless. She pulled out the shotgun that Huaishir had left behind from the saddle and aimed it at the old man's ferocious face. The trigger was pulled. Dark purple light gushed out from the ordinary-looking shotgun. In an instant, it tore through the air and turned into a torrential rain, instantly defeating Horgus. Horgus turned back into smoke and retreated in a sorry state. When he reappeared, his face was already covered with a layer of pockmarked scars. "Now that you've opened your mouth, you must want to ask what that was just now." Ai Qing replied expressionlessly, "Actually, it doesn't matter if I tell you. My soul is called the Eye of Liberation. It can stimulate and use my own sapphira and any sapphira crystal in the most violent way. The simplest way is an explosion. If it's restrained and triggered at the same time, it can form the effect of a firearm." She paused and asked seriously, "Now, you must have experienced my disdain just now, right?" The young girl pulled the bolt and aimed it at his face again. "To be honest, an old pervert like you, who hasn't taken a bath for who knows how long, just looking at you makes me feel so disgusted that I'm about to throw up." Horgus' expression twitched. The chainsaw in his hand let out a hungry roar. It was obvious that he was unable to restrain his anger, but immediately afterwards, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around in astonishment. In the middle of the burning forest, amidst the rising smoke, the returning mountain ghost dragged his axe and walked out of the flames step by step. He revealed a ferocious smile at the old man. "I just left for a while, and another guest came?" "Yes, a rare evil guest. He has a bounty of at least 170 million US dollars on him." Ai Ching let out a long sigh and put down the gun. Her face was pale. "Just putting on an act has already used up all of my strength. That bullet just now had already used up all of her origin substance." "It's fine." The mountain ghost, who had exceeded his limit, slightly twisted his neck, and a crisp sound burst forth from his joints. "I'll take care of him." Sensing the fluctuations of origin substance erupting from the newcomer's chest like a volcano, even Horgus, who had been at the peak of the third rank for several decades, changed his expression. He became more and more incredulous. Why was he so strong? And why was he so fast? An entire border mercenary group. Even if it was impossible for everyone to be ascendants, even if there were 19 pigs carrying guns and cannons on their backs, they should be able to last at least 15 minutes if they were left to be killed. It's very simple. Huai Shi held the sword of virtue and the sacrificial knife upside down with both hands and propped himself up. In place, he assumed a lunging posture. When he raised his head, the corners of his mouth revealed a happy expression that even the ghouls were frightened. "Of course, that's because I'm stronger than you bunch of trash." In that instant, the chainsaw suddenly shook and let out a terrified shriek and wail. Chapter 307. At that moment, Horgus felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Not only was he shocked by the murderous intent, but he was also horrified by the evil chainsaw in his hand under the gaze of that handsome face. It was a terrifying experience that he had never had before. When he dug out this chainsaw from the American ruins, he couldn't help but be infected by the endless hunger and ferocity contained in the chainsaw. He was intoxicated by the murmurs that kept ringing in his ears, and he grew older and stranger day by day. Even though he was spurned and despised because of his depravity, this power was so powerful and violent that no words could slander it. He, who was connected to the chainsaw by blood, had long become an evil beast in the abyss, feeding on blood. Like a symbiotic relationship, he provided the chainsaw with blood, and the chainsaw provided him with power. But now, he felt an unprecedented fear from the chainsaw's constantly fluctuating, ferocious source substance. It was as if he had glimpsed the essence of something more ferocious and crazy than himself through that blood-stained face. He was being watched by malice and predators from a higher dimension that were immersed in the depths of the darkness. He was shivering. He stepped back in shock and blinked in disbelief. He tried to see the gradually blurring figure again, but after a moment of darkness, Huai Shi's smiling face had already appeared in front of him. It was so clear and so cold. It was close at hand. He looked at Horgus's twisted face and smiled. "What are you looking at?" In front of Horgus, he raised his palm and clenched his 5 fingers. His iron-green skin revealed traces of scarlet, like iron that had been heated red. He swung his fist. The drummers roared. Horgus subconsciously wanted to block the chainsaw in front of him, but before he could raise his hand, he felt his vision go black. It was as if he had been hit head-on by a speeding truck, and he flew backward. The muscles on Huaishi's arm burst and quickly healed again. The broken skin healed again, and only a trace of blood-colored mist rose. Huaishi stepped forward. From the broken rocks, Horgus screamed and struggled to climb out, but then he felt his body rising up involuntarily. This was because a hand had already grabbed his head and pulled him up from the ground. It was as if someone had pulled out a carrot. His 5 fingers slowly tightened. His skull groaned in pain. Under the infusion of the ashes and deadly poison, Horgus screamed crazily and waved his chainsaw randomly, resisting without any pattern. But then the screams turned into roars. This was because countless blood vessels suddenly extended out from the chainsaw and sank into his body. They crazily extracted his flesh and blood, making rumbling noises. The metal and bone chainsaw began to operate crazily. Eyes appeared on the back of the chainsaw, covered in blood vessels. They looked around randomly and finally landed on Huaishi. Horgus turned ghastly pale. His face was bloodless. Because the blood had turned into scarlet flames on the chainsaw, the glutton's chainsaw swung horizontally and collided with the axe of wrath. Sparks flew everywhere. Eat, eat, I want to eat. In midair, Horgus twisted randomly like a spider. Ignoring the sound of his cervical vertebrae breaking, he broke free from Huaishi's shackles. He landed on the ground and crawled on his hands and feet. He was very fast. The glutton's chainsaw, which had fused into one, drilled into his bones and merged his entire arm into the chainsaw. The ghoul had been eroded by this ferocious border relic and turned into an inhuman, ferocious monster. It roared hoarsely at Huaishi. It was as if this could scare the enemy away. What answered it was the axe blade that cut down. With the friction of the enchanted gloves, the dark gray lightning formed by the qualitative change of the elemental substance adhered to it, and thunder burst out as Huaishi jumped and hacked. Amidst the rumbling, cracks appeared on the flying chain, and fine bone fragments splattered everywhere. Horgus hugged the axe blade without caring about his own safety, raised the chainsaw that had merged into his right arm, and hacked at Huaishi's face. The axe blade dissipated in an instant. The sacrificial knife was waved horizontally, wedged between the rotating blades. Then the sword of virtue was raised and slashed forward. It tore through Horgus's chest like a hot knife through butter, opening up a huge gash. Stinking blood splattered everywhere. The deformed body flew backward, but then countless teeth emerged from the gash in his chest, and the deformed internal organs were flung out of the gash like long tongues. His entire chest cavity had become a hungry maw, and the chainsaw that had sunk into his body had turned into rapidly rotating teeth. His broken body suddenly propped itself up, and he lunged at Huaishi again. Frenzied hunting. Huaishi took a step back, and the lightning axe blade in his hand drew a nimble arc. He raised it and hacked at the monster that was pouncing at him. The crisp sound of a skull breaking rang out. Then the electric light spread, causing the body that the glutton's chainsaw parasitic to let out a paralyzed scream. With a wave of Huaishi's hand, the sacrificial knife wedged itself into the gaping mouth on Horgus's chest. It frantically extracted all the blood and energy, turning it into gorgeous reliefs and crystals on the blade. Flesh and blood withered. The sword of virtue was held upside down, raised, and stabbed down. It completely penetrated the monster's spine. The glutton's chainsaw let out a sharp scream. Countless eyes fell apart and were destroyed by the glimmer of light on the blade. At the last moment, Horgus's broken face raised with difficulty. His crooked eyes stared at Huaishi, full of resentment and fear. "What are you, the messenger of justice?" Huaishi indifferently pulled out the blade and crushed the last trace of consciousness. The source form collapsed. The chainsaw ghoul met its end. In the dead silence, he looked around and asked expressionlessly, "Is there anything else?" The shadow under the grass and trees shook, but no one responded. "If there's nothing else, I'm leaving." Huaisher sneered, sheathed his sword, and turned to walk towards the white horse. The shadow wriggled as if it was angry, but when Huaisher looked back, it shrank back into the darkness like a frightened bird. Huaisher shook his head, bent down, and washed the blood off his face with the gurgling stream. He took the white horse's reins and continued to move forward. Before leaving, Ai Qing seemed to inadvertently turn back and glance at the unconscious Hupo on the ground. They left. After a long, long time, in the shadow of the grass and trees, a pale man slowly crawled out. After taking off the Shadow Realm breathing device from the corner of his mouth, he panted violently. He was drenched in sweat. Just now, he was almost killed. Damn it, 400 million. Do you think you'll be alive to spend 400 million? The man looked down at the urging message on his phone and spat indignantly. After calling the agent who gave him this task and scolding him, he hung up the phone. The lingering fear still lingered, but soon, looking at the things scattered around, his eyes lit up again. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. He didn't come here for nothing. After stripping the dead people of their equipment, he turned back and looked at the unconscious girl on the ground. He rubbed his hands and couldn't help but gulp. His breathing quickened. "I guess you must have a bold idea." Hupa, who was supposed to be unconscious, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at him calmly. "I suggest you put away that bold idea, then put the things in your hands on the ground." The man was stunned for a moment. He picked up the things, turned around, and ran. Gunshots roared. He fell to the ground. Hupa expressionlessly put away a beautifully decorated flintlock gun, got up from the ground, and slowly picked up the equipment from the ground and piled them together. When she turned back to look at her lunchbox, she only saw the crushed remains and the rice balls that had fallen into the mud. "Cherish your food, bastard." She looked in the direction that Huaisher had left in, and she was furious. The phone rang from her pocket. "Hello, Chief. Yes, I've already fallen and almost died." Hupa tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He helplessly complained, "Why did you give me this kind of job that will only offend people? Isn't this the job of a temporary worker?" The eldest cousin on the phone laughed without any conscience. "Also, if third sister went, wouldn't the taste be completely different? After thinking about it, you're still the most suitable." Hupa sighed and flicked the ash from his cigarette. "I'm not afraid of offending people, but is there any use? Things like hinting are fine as long as they fall. If you say too much, you'll end up being a topic of ridicule. That little girl is so smart, she'll definitely understand, right?" "Who knows?" Hupa shrugged. "Yes, who knows?" After a moment of silence, Zhu Hongchen couldn't help but sigh. "I hope nothing happens to that young man. I'll be scolded by old man Xian Niao for interfering with the Astronomy Association's matters. This really isn't worth it." Hupa didn't respond to his words. He only smoked and quietly watched Huaisher and the others escape in the direction they left in. He suddenly asked, "Do you think he'll really give up?" The eldest cousin didn't reply. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to see that kind of result. In the end, Zhu Hongchen could only sigh. "It's been hard on you, Hupa. Isn't this the job of a temporary worker?" Hupa smoked his cigarette with a salted fish expression. He shook his head and sighed. "But it's still so frustrating. Not only did the ultimate move I painstakingly came up with not being able to be put to use, but I couldn't even beat Huaisher. There's no justice in this world. Director, can you give this poor little Hupa a raise on account of my mental trauma? Can you announce your praise and encourage everyone to learn from your achievements? Pretend I didn't say anything. Hoopa curled his lips and unhappily hung up the phone. He quietly finished his cigarette and stamped it out. He picked up the spoils of war and turned around to leave. But as he walked, he couldn't help but turn around to look behind him. He didn't know if it was envy or pity. "Good luck, Your Highness," she softly muttered. "There really isn't much time left for you." Chapter 308. With the roar, the flames rose. Thick smoke covered the sun, and only the dancing red light illuminated every stunned face in the car window. Then, the white horse's neigh sounded from a distance. At the end of the highway, everyone saw a white figure as vigorous as a dragon running up and over the broken bridge. The iron hooves trampled and instantly crushed the broken window, crushing the grinning face. Blood splattered. Huaishur on the white horse raised his arm, and the force of the white horse gathered on his wrist. The spear of compassion stabbed forward, tearing the outside of the armored car like cutting paper and penetrating deeply into it. After leaving the iris seed, it dissipated in the air. On the road, the rampaging car suddenly turned around and tried to give chase again, but soon it gradually slowed down as it sped along. It was like a giant beast that was being bled. Finally, it stopped on the side of the road. The armored car suddenly shook and was buried in the sudden burst of flames. It was ignited by the spurting flames, blocking the cars behind it. Countless sharp horns brushed past him. On the highway, where the roaring sound came one after another, Huaishur pulled the reins and began to heroically go against the flow in the white horse's neigh. The iron hooves trampled and crushed the asphalt road under their feet. The white horse galloped like the wind. The long mane swayed in the wind, as fierce as a flag. "Be careful in front," Ai Ching behind him reminded in a low voice. And then there was the loud sound of a huge truck drifting and sweeping. Just in front, the heavy giant truck suddenly threw off the outer camouflage shell, revealing the body painted with scarlet graffiti. In the noisy rap, the driver in the driver's seat turned the steering wheel frantically, stepped on the brakes, and swept out the huge tail like a weapon. It was like a rough arm sweeping across a toy plate. After overturning a few cars in front, the horizontal body blocked the white horse's path. Then it slowly opened, revealing the heavy machine gun welded inside the cargo compartment. "Hey, bro, try this." The dark-skinned machine gunner spat out the chewing gum in his mouth and pulled the trigger with a grin. As the bullet chain rolled, a loud roar burst out from his hand. The red-hot metal whizzed out, tearing through the air. Like an endless whip of thunder and fire, it instantly swept towards Huaishur. Then he saw the appearance of the white horse leaping into the air. It was as if he was really flying in the wind. His speed was so fast that even the turning speed of the machine guns could not catch up to him. His speed was so fast that even the machine guns could not catch up to him. In just a few seconds, he had crossed a distance of more than 100 meters. The iron hooves stepped on the carriage. Looking at the dumbfounded face, the white horse snorted disdainfully and spat on the ground in an extremely human-like manner. Immediately afterward, the axe on the horse's back swept horizontally. After cutting off the entire top of the head, it also cut the machine gun that was still firing in the air into two. In the midst of the broken bullets, the white horse turned around and swept the pike of compassion, cutting the shell of the car with irresistible force and sending the two border war wild dogs next to it to the underworld. The explosion of the primordial substance flashed and disappeared. Ai Ching put down her hand. Through the thick armor, a figure that had pounced on her flew backward, his head on the ground. "They're all small fries. Don't get entangled with them." She said, "It should be the eye of nightmare." Those guys like to use cannon fodder to exhaust the strength of their prey before easily capturing them. Following her words, the white horse jumped out from the torn shell of the car again and landed on the ground. It nimbly jumped on the roofs of the cars and finally jumped up and stepped on the overpass. When he turned around, the highway behind him was already in a mess. As the flames spread, thick smoke billowed. The sight of the corpses of the wild dogs of war everywhere was enough to make the coldest white leftists feel heartache. Fortunately, thanks to the Social Security Bureau's extremely quick response and traffic control, this area had been sealed off. None of the people who barged in were innocent. Then a roar came from the sky. Before that, a scarlet light lit up in the dark clouds that could not be dispelled in the sky. The winding curve outlined a blood-red eye symbol. Then, a huge steel ship broke out of the clouds. It was a distant illusion. The exploration ship, which was installed with the latest deep-diving engine, broke into the gap of the present realm from the closest border transit station. It maintained a safe distance from the external defense of the Doomsday system and only opened the door to the present realm by a sliver. Then, the light of a catapult flashed in the cabin that slowly opened. Thus, in the distant illusion, real steel fell from the sky. It rubbed against the air and burst out with blazing flames. Meteors fell. The frenzied roar spread in all directions. Then, a stream of flames spewed out from the falling piece of iron. Like a rocket landing, pieces of iron were constantly thrown off from the body and fell into the wind. They burned into scarlet liquid iron and scattered in all directions. In the end, the heavy iron shell finally fell from the sky and collapsed with a bang. The overpass shook violently. The sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other rang out. The burly figure, half kneeling in it, slowly raised his head. Only a pair of gray eyes could be seen on his face that was covered by a ferocious helmet. The newcomer's entire body was wrapped in well-tempered full-body armor. He held a flame-shaped sword and a dueling shield that were too heavy for ordinary people. He took a step forward with ease. He showed why sure the eye-shaped symbol on the shield. It represented the arrival of one of the most famous border mercenary groups in the border, and hell, the Eye of Nightmare. Although it's a little unfair to compete with an opponent who has experienced such a battle, I hope you can understand. The Iron Knight said in a muffled voice, "This means war." Weisher dismounted and looked around. Finally, he raised his eyes to look at the illusory shadow in the sky. He was full of doubts. If it's just you alone, it can't be considered war, right? I'm the one who made the request. The descender shrouded in steel said, "If I can solve this bounty alone, then the army commander will personally dot the Eye of Nightmare on my shield." Beside his hand, the Eye of Nightmare symbol was empty on the dueling shield that was big enough to block his entire body. It represented his identity as an immature. Only those who were personally bestowed the Eye of Nightmare emblem by the army commander could become an official member of this hell army. Before that, no matter how long they served, no matter what kind of war they participated in, or how many enemies they reaped, if their ability was not proven and not recognized, then they would never be able to get rid of this mark that represented childishness and weakness. If you still insist on not retreating, then bring it on, young man. The ascendant from the abyss raised his flame-shaped sword and solemnly declared, "Under the witness of this, you and I will fight. No one will interfere, and there will be no other outcome. We will not rest until one of us is dead. If you defeat me, it means that my trial has failed, and the Eye of Nightmare will no longer interfere in this matter. I'll go over, but unfortunately, the horse is being ridden by someone else. It's not convenient to use it." Weisher shrugged indifferently and stepped forward step by step. He raised his voice and asked, "How should I address you?" "What I mean is, I can at least set up a tombstone for you later." Richard, he said, Richard the Exiled. The Level 3 sublimator reported his name and revealed the aura that was bound in his body. The phantom of a griffin rose from behind him. At that moment, the iron boots shattered the concrete under his feet. The dueling shield shook and pushed forward with a loud bang. Like a war chariot, when the inhuman body under the armor began to exert force, a violent force burst out from it, pushing the heavy armor that weighed 100 kilograms forward with a loud bang. It stirred up a whistling hurricane. Huaishur retreated step by step, pushed by the violent force on the shield. 2 cracks appeared in the broken concrete under his feet, and he felt the terrifying force contained in the short collision. His hand went numb. Against such an enemy, he should use the method he was best at to fight and exhaust him. With his speed, Richard would definitely not be able to catch up. But now he could not escape. If he kept retreating, Richard, who had lost his patience, would attack Ai Qing directly. He could not retreat. Then he would use the method of not retreating. He took a deep breath, and his face flushed red. Then it instantly turned pale, and a trace of ashen color appeared. The hot sweat evaporated into mist, rising from his bare hands and face. Amidst the wisps of white, his muscles were trembling crazily. It was as if they had been burned red. Huaishur let out a long sigh and exhaled the burning breath in his lungs. The flames of the mountain ghost rose from the crack in his chest and enveloped his body once again. The advancement of the shield came to an abrupt stop before Huaishur raised her hand and spread her fingers. Behind the armor, Richard raised his eyes in surprise and immediately came to a realization. Is this the move that was displayed in the rookie competition? An awe-inspiring skill. The flame-shaped sword slashed down with a whistling sound. As Huaishur dodged, a deep crack appeared in the ground. Then, as Richard waved, the heavy long sword slapped on the shield. Sparks flew. It was like the sound of marching drums. You are indeed a strong opponent who can fight with me. Richard stared at Huaishur in front of him with anticipation. Come, your highness. Victory or death. In the long howl of the griffin, its wings spread out, and a bright glow enveloped Richard's armor. The enemy stepped forward, attacking the burning mountain ghost. What responded to him was the saber and axe in Huaishur's hands. The friction caused blazing sparks to burst out. It scattered toward the flame-shaped sword that was slashing down. The sharp sound of steel colliding burst out again. Huaishur took a step back, but this time he was not destroyed by the terrifying power. With the mountain ghost's sacred mark that could constantly repair the body and temporarily sacrifice the body to increase the power beyond the limit state, Huaishur's muscle strength finally entered the third stage, the realm of ether. He could feel the violent power surging in his pulse like lava. The mountain ghost grinned, and the axe in his hand changed. He pulled out the sword of virtue and rushed forward. Again, that you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.